through the property standards bylaw. The second order was related to the rehabilitation and restoration of the heritage attributes of the building. So the exterior metalwork, masonry, windows, all that sort of thing. The deadline for that order was the end of April. The work has not been completed at this point in time. However, staff have been privy to recent meaningful correspondence between the owner of the property, or sorry, the owner's agent, so the owner's architect, and a local firm that specializes in restoration, and they are moving towards a signed contract to complete that restoration work. In light of this, while the owner has not met the deadline, staff are, because we are seeing meaningful progress towards compliance with the order, we are working closely with our bylaw and regulatory services staff in order to push this forward, but holding back on issuing summons for court order at this point in time. However, we have told the property owner and their agent that we want to see a signed contract for this work by the end of June, and if that is not in place, we will proceed with further action under the property standards bylaw. In addition to this, we do have a pre-consultation meeting scheduled for later this week with planning staff and heritage staff for a redevelopment proposal on this property. We can't divulge what the details of that proposal are at this point in time, but it is including redevelopment of the property and the building. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Leslie. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Lucky for you, my microphone's working. Thank you for that. I've been kept apprised of much of what's happening from staff, so I do appreciate that, and appreciate the timing around moving forward with the signed contract, even though they did not meet the end of April deadline, which is discouraging for the community, as you can well imagine. We've been given a lot of false hope and stops and starts on this project for over a decade. So I just want to know exactly what happens if at the end of June, two things. I want to know exactly what happens the last day of June if there isn't a signed contract. What's the process? How long before we move in, before bylaw moves in, before we move in and do the work ourselves and charge back? If there is a signed contract, what are we putting in place to ensure that the actual work begins and ends in a timely fashion, that this isn't dragged out for another year or two with a signed contract?
As far as your first question, at the end of June, that's sort of the timeline that we've set at this point in time. We will work again with our bylaw staff. The next step in the process would be a summons to provincial court under I believe it's a Part 3 summons for non-compliance with a property standards order. In terms of when we would take action to go in and do the work, I think I'd have to defer to our property standards officer, who unfortunately is not here today, to give us that answer, because I'm not sure. So we'd have to get back to the committee on that in terms of the timing. And then in terms of your second question,
That's disappointing.
the owner will have to get a heritage permit for this work, and we intend to include a long series of conditions on that permit to ensure that the work is done in a timely manner and appropriately. So there will be additional checks and balances, as well as us seeking a signed contract with a firm that has the expertise to complete this work.
Okay, thank you for that. It's a little disappointing that staff aren't here to respond to that from bylaw and regulatory services. So if I could get something in writing from them on what that would look like, what happens on, I know, June 30th, so it's a summons to provincial court for non-compliance, but then what is the time frame from then on? I don't want to be back here in the fall having this same conversation. Okay. So if we could, yeah, just make sure that that's sent out, can be to all committee members from bylaw services. That'd be great.
Yeah, we can provide that.
Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I chuckled when you said there's been meaningful progress because we've never heard those words with respect to this property. Can you just reassure me that on what frequency the structure is assessed for structural integrity to ensure there's no safety issues with pedestrians walking by, cyclists, motorists? How often are we assessing the structure?
As far as I know, our building code services staff require monthly monitoring reports from the owner on the condition of the structure.
Any other questions from the committee? I have a question just about procedure. We don't receive updates like this for every heritage building. Just very quickly, what's the background as to why we get updates here, and when would the next update be anticipated for this committee? It's Court Curry making his way to a working microphone.
So, Chair, we had provided an update, I believe it was last summer, to committee at the councillor's request, Councillor McKinney's request, prior to the issuing of the two orders. And at the time, the committee direction was to come back and provide a verbal update in Q2. So that's why we're before you today with this update. In your hands, whether you'd like to have further updates in this form, or we can issue them via memo to committee after the end of June, if that would be more efficient.
Just conferring with Councillor McKinney, we'd appreciate a memo to the committee with an update, but we don't have to bring it back necessarily to this formal committee. Thank you.
Very well.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the first of a few items on the agenda in regards to the Heritage Register. I know there are a lot of delegations here today. Most of you, I think, have signed up if you're wishing to speak, but if you are intending to speak and you haven't signed up yet, please do so at the front desk. We're going to begin with the item. It's listed as removal of properties from the register 2016 to 2018. And our Vice Chair has a technical amendment motion on this item. So there is an updated report available. It was posted to ottawa.ca and distributed to members of this committee on June 5th. So this motion is to substitute the updated report so we may consider it instead of the report originally sent to members with the agenda. So Vice Chair Quinn, if you can read the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion reads, whereas staff have made revisions to the removal of properties from the Heritage Register 2016-2018 report after it was distributed with the agenda and published at ottawa.ca, and whereas the revised report on this item, submitted May 31st, 2019, was distributed to committee members and posted to ottawa.ca on June 6th, 2019, to ensure that it was placed before the committee and available to members of the public ahead of the meeting, therefore be it resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee substitute the report distributed with the agenda for the revised report submitted on May 31st, which amended the report recommendation as follows: that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Planning Committee recommend that Council remove reference to the properties listed in Document 1 from the Heritage Register.
Okay, is the motion carried? Carried, thank you. On this first part, the removal of properties from the 2016 to 2018 register, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this? I would imagine most people are here for the next report at this committee. Any questions from the committee for staff on this removal? Councillor Tierney?
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. In regards to item number 2, 234 Blackburn Avenue, it says it's being removed at the owner's request. How did we receive that request? What channel did that come through? Did they have to come speak at this committee as well?
Good morning. Through you, Mr. Chair. The property at 234 Blackburn was added to the Heritage Register back in 2017 through the Heritage Inventory Project. After staff had assessed the property and recommended addition to the register and was approved by Council, the property owner then therefore came forward completing our form called Forum for Buildings listed on the Heritage Register, and they disclosed some information that we were unaware of about the property, that we had misinterpreted. So they submitted that form to us, and this is now their chance, through this report that's before you today, to be removed from the register. So they did not speak at committee.
So it was just done by a simple form? Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Great, thank you for the information.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Is the report carried as amended? Carried? Thank you. All right, we'll now move on to item 2, which is additions to the Heritage Register citywide. We have another technical amendment the Vice Chair will read to remove demolished buildings from the list of proposed additions. Motion coming. Here it is. Vice Chair Quinn.
Thank you. The motion reads, whereas staff have been made aware that since the report was published on ottawa.ca, a number of properties intended to be listed on the Heritage Register have since been demolished. Therefore, be it resolved that reference to the following properties be removed from the report: 506 Piccadilly Avenue. Be it further resolved that the report be amended by striking out 2345 and inserting 2344 in terms of number. Thank you.
Okay, is the motion carried? Carried? Thank you. Okay, we have, to begin, we have staff here to provide an overview. Just want to remind folks in the audience as well, if you haven't signed up yet and you're intending to speak, there's still time. You can sign up at the desk at the front. So we're going to begin with the staff overview, and then we'll have an opportunity for our public delegations to make presentations as we go.
Good morning. We're just waiting for the screens. Perhaps I can introduce our table while we're waiting for those to come up.
All right.
Hi, my name's Avery Marshall. I'm one of the Built Heritage researchers with the Heritage Inventory Project. Next to me is Cass Calzero. Cass is also a heritage researcher with the project. We're the co-authors of the report we've submitted for this morning. Next to Cass is Dana Collings. He's the manager of Heritage and Urban Design Services. And we're also joined by heritage planner Leslie Collins. So as I mentioned, we've brought forward a citywide report titled Additions to the Heritage Register. This report culminates the results of a multi-year study known as the Heritage Inventory Project. This project began as a City of Ottawa strategic initiative. It included an SI to complete an updated heritage list. So traditionally, the City of Ottawa has maintained or has relied on two heritage lists, the Heritage Register and the Heritage Reference List. We've got a sort of a back and forth, the differences here. One is a publicly available list required under the Heritage Act. That's the Heritage Register, which we're talking about today. It's publicly accessible, and we maintain it through an annual report, as was submitted by Ashley Kotarba just before on the agenda. The other list that staff refer to is the Heritage Reference List. The reference list is not required, it's not available to the public, and it's not regularly updated. It's actually a compilation of many lists from former municipalities. Some of them go back to the 1980s, some a bit earlier, and it was inherited at the time of amalgamation. So the intent of the study that we're talking about is to update the register and to phase out the heritage reference list. The Heritage Inventory Project was developed as a way to identify these properties in order to update the register. Council approved the approach and methodology through a 2016 staff report. This is the first and only citywide heritage study in Ottawa. Other municipalities across the project have done similar inventories. Some, like Toronto, are looking at doing that soon, and we're very pleased to have wrapped up this field work last year and bring the report forward now. The project promotes an enhanced public understanding about heritage properties and appreciation for these cultural heritage resources. And I'll move to Ontario Heritage Act.
So the Ontario Heritage Act requires municipalities to maintain a register of properties of cultural heritage value or interest. The register includes properties designated under Parts 4 and Parts 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as well as listed or non-designated properties that have not been designated but are of cultural heritage value or interest. The Heritage Act outlines the procedures for listing a property and for designating a property. So there are significant differences between a listed or non-designated property and a designated property. So as per the chart up on the screen, a non-designated property must have cultural heritage value or interest. There's no requirement to notify owners before or after being added to a register. No heritage status is registered on title. There are no restrictions on interior or exterior alterations, additions, renovations, and only a 60-day notice to the city is required prior to an application for demolition. Designated properties, on the other hand, must meet specific criteria under Ontario Regulation 906. In order to designate the property, a notice of intent to designate must be sent to the owner. A bylaw is registered on title once the property is designated. Any alterations require a heritage permit, and as per the Ontario Heritage Act, council approval is required prior to the issuance of a demolition permit. So some key points to note. As indicated, the criteria for designation is outlined in OREG 906, and these criteria were not considered when evaluating properties through the Heritage Inventory Project. The Ontario Heritage Toolkit specifically states that screening properties for potential protection in accordance with the criteria in Regulation 906 is a higher evaluation test than required for listing non-designated properties on the register. So listing and designated are distinct and separate processes. Listing on the Heritage Register is not a precursor to designation. Through the inventory project, we are adding properties to the register as non-designated properties. So as for our assessment criteria, each structure was assessed for cultural heritage value according to a methodology that considered both design and context. In order to merit listing on the Heritage Register, a property had to have been built prior to 1980 and had to meet our design test and reflect our neighborhood heritage statement attributes. So the design test requires that the facade of the building express a particular style, showcase local design and materials, feature architectural elements, demonstrate original built form, and that any changes are sympathetic to the original building. We also prepared neighborhood heritage statements for each of our 26 study areas. The statements summarize the historical settlement patterns, significant historical themes, and heritage attributes of the area. These attributes are used in assessment. So the structure must contribute to the heritage fabric of the street or neighborhood, connect with a landscape, or reflect a story or the life of an Ottawan. They may also form part of a group that adds to cultural identity and or has historical land use role in the neighborhood. Moving on to public consultation. So currently, there's no requirement under the Ontario Heritage Act for municipalities to notify property owners or to hold information sessions before or after a property is added to a municipal heritage register as a non-designated listing. Staff notified all impacted property owners of the intent to add their properties to the Heritage Register in advance of the report, and we also held several information sessions and offered drop-in days at client service centers. So our consultation included mailing a notification package to all of our impacted property owners. This package contained a letter outlining the inventory project and providing contact information for staff. It also included a brochure outlining the Heritage Inventory Project, the design and neighborhood criteria, and answers to frequently asked questions related to the register. It included a flyer listing dates and times of public information sessions and drop-in days, and an information sheet about the property being proposed for the register. So none of these things were required under the Heritage Act, but we provided this to the property owners in advance of this report. 5 public information sessions were held in 2018 and 19. We held 3 drop-in days this year at various client service centers across the city. Councillors, community associations, and heritage organizations were notified, and staff held meetings with several councillors and their staff, with property owners, and with other stakeholders. We tracked all responses and feedback following outreach and consultation. Our responses included questions and comments about the project, additional information about properties supplied by the owners, requests for reassessment and removal from the proposed list, and as a good news item, we also had several property owners request applications to designate their properties.
After completing the fieldwork, assessments, owner notices, and public meetings, staff adjusted our list based on feedback, and our report presents 2,344 properties for addition to the Heritage Register as non-designated listings. These buildings range from homes to schools to hospitals and high-rise towers. They demonstrate a wide variety of building types and architectural styles. The list includes 29 log structures and 155 stone buildings. The oldest building is dated to the 1790s, and the newest buildings are from 1978. Staff identified a number of buildings designed by prominent architects as well. The project map is a little pale on the screens, but the report we're looking at today is sort of that green-yellow area. So the bulk of the 19 wards across Ottawa are represented in this report. The purple areas, so you can see wards 19 and 5 show largely, but 1, 5, 7, and 19 are postponed. And the neon green is Lower Town, Sandy Hill, Old Ottawa East, and Old Ottawa South. Those properties were brought to council back in 2017, and 582 listings were added to the Heritage Register at that time. So we did put together a ballpark, so you can get an understanding of a bit of before the project, after the project. Before this project started, the register had 543 listings on it. And through the project, we're adding a variety through this report, the 2017 reports, and a proposed fall report. And we're looking at about 3,950 total non-designated listings. The entire register does include Part 4s and Part 5s. So the entire register would be about 7,500 properties would be our total list. The results that we're talking about, those are shared publicly on both ottawa.ca and also on GeoOttawa. We wanted to show how it looks on GeoOttawa. This is a snapshot of part of Ward 12 from the 2017 report that shows actually when you go into GeoOttawa, turn on the planning layer and heritage, what you can see is the variety of heritage resources here. And so you can click them and get a little info about the property address.
So our report recommends that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Council approve the addition of the proposed 2,344 properties to the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register as non-designated listings, discontinue the use of the Heritage Reference List in the wards impacted by this report, and direct staff to conduct additional heritage analysis in wards 1, 5, 7, and 19, Dunrobin, Arlington Woods, and the Carlington Neighborhood Subdivision containing wartime homes as per document 7 of our report. This concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We're going to move to public delegations in just a moment. A technical note, so the microphones on the staff side of the room are not working, and all of our microphones, except for Councillor Chiarelli's, are working, so this is good. So Councillor Chiarelli, if you need to speak, you're going to have to borrow Vice Chair Quinn's microphone. If you need to speak. That's a big if. Okay. We are going to go delegation by delegation. We have 24 delegations signed up to speak, so quite a few. And what we'll do is we'll go through each delegation, and the committee will have the opportunity to ask questions to staff on each of the individual properties that we hear about. There's quite a few here. Now, as staff have mentioned, there's quite a bit of correspondence we've had on this file, and we have had objections to date, and where staff are aware of objections, they have had time to reassess the properties. Most of the reassessments, the properties were still found to meet the criteria. Some of them were not, and would have been removed from this report. Staff is also preparing a motion so that today, if we find there are additional properties that should be deferred to the fall in terms of the next update, we would have the opportunity to add those to a motion. That motion will come at the end of all of the delegations, just so we have one motion that captures all of it. And what staff have recommended, that as we're hearing the delegations, they would be open to moving to defer properties to the fall 2019 report if there's a new objection received today that they're not aware of and they haven't had the chance to reassess, or if new information is provided that will warrant an assessment. So we'll be able to get staff's advice on that as we go. So the first speaker today registered, we're going to go in the order of registrations. We have Michael Ray from 599 Churchill Avenue North. Michael Ray, if you can come up to the front. After that, we have Ji Chu Jing and Bi Jing after that. So Michael Ray. Is Michael here? I don't see Michael. Okay. So we'll move on. The next speaker on the list is Ji Shu Zhang from 2444 Thorson Avenue. Okay, and Bing Ji from 2444 Thorson Avenue. All right, Michael Tanis from 288 Catherine Street. Michael? Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Chair.
Is that the correct address, 288 Catherine Street?
It is.
Okay, thank you. You've got 5 minutes for your presentation.
Won't take that long. We purchased this property 30 years ago, and now the family is alarmed. There may be restrictions on development in play retroactively, causing us financial distress. When we have, there's nothing, the building is by a local architect that's well-known, but in the grand scheme of things, there's nothing remarkable about the look of the building compared to many other works by this architect. So we suggest that this building should be removed from the registry consideration.
Okay, thank you. Staff, were you aware of this objection before today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we received an objection to this in 2018, and as well as this year prior to this report. 2018 was when the property was previously proposed for addition to the register.
Have you done any reassessment or reevaluation on the property?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've reassessed the property. in 2018 and 2019.
And it still meets the criteria for design and context.
Just find that the whole, the procedure is very arbitrary, and that, heritage is in the eye of the beholder sometimes, and we just don't feel that this building meets the standards.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington, you have a question?
Mr. Chair, normally we wait to ask questions of staff to the end, but I think it's appropriate. I'm not going to make a list of 24 speakers. Can we just ask brief
Oh, absolutely.
questions? Okay.
We can continue to ask staff for each property.
So to staff, how old is this house?
The building,
I'm asking staff.
Thank you, Chair. The building date we have on record is 1949.
Okay, and will there be retroactive financial penalties if this is added to the registry?
Thank you, Chair. No, there's no penalties to being added to the registry,
Exactly.
financially or otherwise. Yeah.
The homeowner will not be penalized.
No.
Thank you. That's it.
can I address that comment?
No, sir, you cannot.
Why
Any
not?
other questions from committee members?
I didn't have 5 minutes yet. Nobody wants their home on a registry. It doesn't add to the value of the house in most cases.
Mr. Tanis, you've made your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The delegation, William Nickel from 1 Avenue. We have Leo and Marianne Derricks.
Good morning, Mr.
Nickel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Is that the correct address, 188 Glebe Avenue?
Yes.
Thank you.
I come at this from a bit of a different perspective because for over the last 8 to 10 years, I've received several notices from the city advising me that I was a heritage property and that I could apply for a grant to assist in maintaining the heritage features. And if you'll see as Exhibit 2 in my written brief, the most I'd call up and I would get an email back, oh no, there's been a mistake, you're not heritage, no grant. And this happened 3 times. The most recently one is Exhibit 2. So 8 to 10 years ago, it just became unfeasible for me to maintain the heritage features, and I've capped everything with aluminum and vinyl and cedar, and the cedar shakes are gone, the vinyl's on. I put simulated cedar shakes on the front, which I think have been misinterpreted as something original. But for all intents and purposes, my house, the facade, is similar to some of the modern rebuilds, new builds in the neighborhood, and they are in exhibits in the written presentation that I've made. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I come at it sort of from 2 minds. I think the objective here is to try and preserve the character of the old neighborhood such as the Glebe. And the objective is to try and get a handle on demolitions that occur spontaneously with no, shall we say, oversight. And what you're trying to do is have a 60-day window to go and look and see if the building that's being proposed to be demolished is heritage. And I'm in favor of that. But I think she's going to circulate section 9. Hello? Maybe she didn't. The OREG that we're talking about is 906. As I read it, now it only applies to section 29 for true heritage designation, but it's very broad. And we know now that there is no OREG in respect to this proposal, so the city has even greater discretion. And I guess my pitch would be to say that every house in the Glebe prior to 1980 has heritage value, and you don't really need to go to a lot of trouble. You could pick it up off the assessment register, and you could simply designate all of them on a list. It doesn't need to be advertised, as your staff has said. There's no requirement for that. It doesn't need to raise a lot of hackle in the neighborhood where people feel, oh, I'm on and he's off. But there's no point in designating, say, every 10th house as heritage and the other 8 are demolished, because over time, what you have is a new modern neighborhood and the designated survivors are now the oddballs. So I would suggest that you kind of rethink what you're doing, and in areas like the Glebe and perhaps Ottawa South and Dow's Lake, you could simply pick up from the tax register all the properties that were built before 1980 and send them a notice and say, before you get a building permit to demolish, there will be a heritage inspection that will add an extra 60 days to the process. And if you're, and I guess that'll be the experts to decide if it's a heritage property, because there's many that have been missed in this go-round. That gives you the window that you need. And you don't need to do a lot of rigmarole or spend a lot of feet on the street sort of thing looking at properties. You can do a lot from Google Earth, and you can get a cursory view right away and then send somebody out if it's an issue. But I think that places like the Glebe and the older sections of town, you could simply go from the tax rolls and say, send them a notice if you really feel you have to send them a notice, and legislatively you don't. And that would be referred to by the planning department when the building request for a demolition permit comes in. And you would see that, oh, that's there, we'll have a look. And I think it could be a lot simpler process, because what you're doing now is stirring up a lot of, inequity, where not everybody's on the list that should be, and those who are on feel, well, my neighbor next door, he's not on, his property looks just the same as mine. He'll be demolished, I'll get a new build there, and I'll be the odd guy. And I think that would be a way to perhaps settle the controversy that surrounds all of this. I hope that's a helpful comment. I've given you a written submission there. I originally came at it from the standpoint of, I don't think I am heritage because of what I've done, but I would not object to being part of a larger group if the whole was designated heritage. We can't do it as a heritage district. As it's explained to me, that takes a long, long time. A heritage district would give you some control of what gets rebuilt there. Can't do that at this stage, but I think if you went that direction, you would at least have the 60 days that you want. And it would be important for areas like the Glebe to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shirley.
Okay. Mr. Chair, actually the applause actually indicates exactly what I'm about to say, which is when the proposal to do this came forward, I was opposed to it because I thought it would lead to this confusion. But for whatever reason, council has decided we will follow this process. So anybody who comes up to argue that we shouldn't follow this process is really wasting their time, because we don't even have the authority not to follow the process. So we have to follow the process. The second issue is that this is not step one in the designation of a property as a heritage property. This is just an internal recognition by the city of what properties may have heritage value. That doesn't mean that there are potential candidates to be designated under the Heritage Act. So that is the second part. It really shouldn't be part of anyone's argument, because it doesn't have an impact on that designation.
No, and I fully appreciate what you're saying, and all I'm saying is that you have a great deal of latitude, and what you've done would be more effective if it was broader and more equitable.
Councillor Moffat.
So at the risk of being off topic based on what Councillor just said, it seems to me that you're suggesting that what we should have done was just blanket everyone, not tell them, and then it would have been a lot better because they wouldn't have known, and yet everyone's house would have been on the list.
You had to think, legislatively, there was no requirement to give notice.
So that's a yes.
So that's a yes, but if you opted to give notice, it could be as just a simple
I'm good.
notice.
We're done.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Staff or the delegation? Vice Chair Quinn.
This is a question for staff. When you were looking at properties in an historic neighborhood like the Glebe, and I think this is probably an example of a house that that contributes to the heritage fabric of the street or neighborhood, just in thinking about this gentleman's question about why my house and why not my neighbor's house, can you elaborate a little bit? Don't have to belabor it, but just how those decisions were made when you looked at a streetscape where there were a number of contributing properties. Just how did you refine your decision? Thank you.
For areas like the Glebe and other older neighborhoods, because the context was consistently strong throughout that study area, we relied heavily on the design test. The contextual side was already prevalent, and so we really did look closely at design. And so what you'll see in the Glebe is that properties where there was an alteration that is notable from the right-of-way, let's say an addition in front, or large dormers, or a huge change to the entrance, that may have been enough to not pass our design test.
Thank you.
Councillor Tierney?
Great, thank you for that. So on that, how do you determine, is there and forgive me, I'm not really immersed in the heritage side of things, but I am very familiar with some of the tests we've done in the past, a couple of years ago, Buchan Road. And of course, some of us were saying, well, let them demolish it. It's part of a heritage group, and there was some scoring provided. Now, at the end of the day, we know what happened. The OMB overturned our decision, and the person of the 1960s-style house won the opportunity to tear down their house. So is there a similar scoring system, and is it something that's available for us to see for each property?
No, we didn't use a scoring system here. What we have done in the case where there's more information required from the owner or from an interested party, we've gone through each of the criteria, and we have a response, either yes or no, or in some cases a comment. And so we have provided that on request to owners.
That's wonderful. And is that something that would be available to councillors as well for those individual properties?
We can certainly make it available. Just let us know what property you need. They're custom prepared, and we go back through our assessment notes from our meetings, and we put together that table.
Great. And as we're going through this, and Glenn, I'm just getting it all out right now, the short of it is, as we're having these delegations come forward, you know, at the will of the committee, how do you determine which ones, because at the end of the day, your committee does have quite a bit of power, to remove or to keep in? I see a series of questions going back and forth to staff, but if you're going to trot up 25 people, they're going to give a spiel, and you're voting as one package, I don't know how that quite works. So maybe you can get clarification from staff on how that would work for individual properties.
If I could just interject, what I've learned from listening to staff,
Can staff respond to Councillor Tierney around how you're recommending that the committee evaluate delegations today?
So for this morning, if there's an objector who is new to us, we haven't had a chance to meet with them, we haven't had a chance to resolve any of their concerns, and we haven't reevaluated the property, I think there still is a question, does it meet our test? Was there a mistake here? And we would encourage committee to consider a motion to defer those to allow staff time to review.
And wonderful. So based on the timing of this, obviously you'll go through, there's plenty of time if we're going to have so many delegations. Would you supply that information to the chair before the end of the meeting for that to take place? And part B of that question, and I've seen it being vice chair of planning, where sometimes people don't get aware of things for some weird reason, and they'll show up at planning committee. We've also removed people from the registry at the planning committee. Is that still the case?
This report rises directly to council, but I do believe that we will have that opportunity toward the end of the meeting. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions for staff or the delegation on this property? Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Nicol.
if I could just say, I did learn from...
Mr. Nicol, we need to move on. We have a lot of delegations. Sorry, no. Our next delegation is Leo and Marianne Derricks from 14 Rothwell Drive, followed by Charles Ma. Do we have Leo and Marianne Derricks here? I don't think so. Charles Ma, 116 and 118 Empress Avenue. Good morning, Charles. Welcome, Mr. Ma. You'll have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Ma, and I'm the trustee and deacon of Chinese Christian Church of Ottawa, also known as CCCO. Among us, we also have Lapkin Yip, who is the chairperson of the elder board, and also Reverend Francis Wong, who is our pastor. Also, Y.C. Lee is our architect, and he is also here with us. First of all, I would like to thank the Built Heritage Subcommittee for the opportunities to speak on behalf of CCCO. CCCO is an ethnic Chinese church. We have about 200 families. We left the Chinese United Church about 30 years ago to start our new church. We had the desire and conviction to serve the Chinese community in Chinatown, especially for the seniors and the new immigrants. We were blessed by our Lord. For the last 30 years, we come to own 2 buildings, and we planted a new church in Barhaven. What you see on the screen right now is what we took about 2 weeks ago. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary. As the general age in Chinatown is getting older, our service to the community is needed more than ever. Last year, we learned that the Built Heritage Subcommittee's intention to place both our buildings into the heritage inventory list. The church trustees invited Ms. Avery Marshall to come to CCCO for a meeting on August the 3rd. We voiced our concern and objection with her at the meeting, and we follow up with an email on August the 5th. Then we follow up with 2 separate emails to Mr. Eric Palot on May the 8th and also June the 6th. The emails were also CC'd to our counselor, Catherine McKinnon. I believe the emails should have been circulated among you by now. However, even with those 3 emails, our 2 church properties are still recommended to be added to the heritage inventory list. I request for an opportunity to speak in front of the subcommittee. We have 2 reasons to object our 2 properties being included. First, the heritage inventory project pamphlet stated that the 2 criteria to be included in the inventory list. The first is meet the design test, and the second is reflect the neighborhood heritage of the statement attributes, which is all contained in this pamphlet. Our first building, oh yeah, by the way, I got some pictures of our 30th anniversary celebration. So these are our worship service and the dinner afterwards. We have a lot of workshops for the seniors. And this is the first building that in question. So looking at the first building, it's a blocking structure. It has a flat roof, and the windows are the modern type, office type of windows. The outside stairs has been modified to ensure safety. As such, it is a monotonous building with no special features or design that meet the criteria A of the pamphlet. This is the second building. It's an ordinary small building. It might have some neighborhood heritage attributes, but in the past half century, there has been a significant change of building mosaic in our area. Because you can see on our left, it's a 9-story apartment building, which you can see on the left side of the screen here. And on our right, it is a modern building with office and a Middle East grocery store. And at the end of the street, it's a modern style dwelling. And 2 blocks away, we have this magnificent Chinese pavilion 2 blocks away. And also a string of Chinese and Vietnamese restaurants around our street corner. We strongly believe that the 2 church properties do not possess the heritage value of which the provincial and municipal governments intend to conserve. It will not serve the purpose and spirit of the Ontario Heritage Act. On the contrary, such inclusion would be detrimental to our church in our goal of serving the community around us because of the undue and severe restrictions, which brings me to my second reason of objection.
You're at your 5-minute. Please wrap up your presentation.
Okay, well, okay. As I mentioned earlier that we are a Chinese community, we actually always looking into growing the church. And our church leader recognized the fact that we need more space. They commissioned a study 2 years ago to explore the different options to recommend a way to go forward. And the group has been working with our architect, Y.C. Lee, and we come up with a new design, which is our new design here, if you look at the screen. And this is this is going to be imminent, okay? So it is a much better improvement of what we have right now. And but if we are placed on the list, then, you know, our hands are tied, you know, so. Okay. I'm sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ma. I know we have some questions from committee members. Councillor Brockington and then Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To staff, if either one of these buildings is added to the list, what are the severe restrictions that will be placed on the owners?
Yes.
Thank you for the question. There are no restrictions to alterations, renovations, additions to a property when it's on the Heritage Register as a non-designated listing. There's many examples across the city where buildings, whether designated or not designated, or not even heritage, have been integrated successfully into new developments.
So, Mr. Ma, there will be no severe restrictions. One point that the delegate made that I would like staff to respond to is that it parallels the answer you gave to the gentleman from the glebe. And I thought I heard you say that there were some homes in the glebe that weren't added because alterations had been made that sort of take away from the total heritage aspect of the structure. Mr. Ma has pointed out that his building has been altered as well. There are some modern components to that building. So why is there not a consistent approach if you don't add homes from the glebe because they've been renovated with modern components? Why would his building then be added?
Thanks for the question. So it would depend on the nature of the alteration. And looking at the buildings in question at 116 and 118 Empress, the window openings are still intact. The form is still intact. The decorative elements on the facade of the building are still intact. Alterations that might warrant a building not be included would be if the window openings had been altered, if the cladding had been significantly changed, if there was an unsympathetic addition, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ma, for coming out. I just want to pick up on what Councillor Brockington was asking for staff. Can you just tell us if there were an application from the church for a redevelopment, what are the restrictions if, in fact, this address is on the inventory list?
I think, you know...
sorry, no, I'm just asking the staff first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay, I'll take a shot at that one. There's really no restriction specifically, with the exception of the 60 days notice to demolish, if indeed that was their plan to move forward. Looking at the image in front of me, I suspect it is a demolition proposal, so that becomes a very complicated proposal in the downtown environment. So in a downtown environment, there are many, many processes that one has to go through. There's site plan control, there might be minor variances, there might be rezonings. Heritage would always be a consideration if there's built form on those properties. That is something that typically takes much longer than 60 days. That is something that we would review in development review. Comes into the city, we'd have pre-consultant talk about all possible issues for a redevelopment proposal.
Thank you. So, Mr. Ma, just in terms of the 60-day notice for demolition, outside of that, do you believe that there's any other, I just don't understand what other restrictions, severe restrictions you see on this property?
Yeah, they are, you know, so because we have to come up with a funding of between $6 to $8 million, and it could be a partnership, it could be, you know, I mean, we need to look for finance, And even if, if this plan doesn't work out, we may decide to sell the building. Who is going to willing to buy a property that is under the heritage list? Because, there are all kinds of restrictions to it. So it does.
Mr. Ma, we just heard that the only restriction is 60 days.
Oh, well, the
So I
60
think we
days,
need to
yes,
stick
the
to
60
that.
days, I mean, if the city decide that, well, this is heritage and you're not allowed to demolish it, we have no recourse. I mean, we're at the mercy of the city hall that, decide our fate, and that is not a very comfortable feeling.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you, Mr. Ma. Our next speaker today is Stephen Smith, 1581 John Quinn Road, and following that, Lara Waite. Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, good day.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, listen, got a letter in the mail saying that you're going to put my house on a list. And I read the letter, and you want to put restrictions on my property, conditions and such, and I don't want it. I don't want anything to do with the heritage. I wanted to get it taken off of this non-designated list. This is why I'm here to tell you that. When I bought the place, I had to get a collateral mortgage, 21% interest, That's because CMHC wouldn't insure it. The house wasn't worth much. The property was. Now, if you've got a condition on tearing it down, that's my whole angle on selling the place. So, I want to get this taken off. Can we do that today? Can you push a button on your computer and do that, or?
Well, do we have any questions from the committee for staff or for our delegation? Staff?
Comment.
Okay, Councillor Moffat.
So you should know that, we've added, you live in Greeley. I represent Rideau Goulburn, so Manatee. I represent the rural area as well.
I can't understand what you're saying.
Sorry, you live in Greeley, correct?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. So I represent a rural area as well. And a few years ago in Richmond, we put about 200 properties on the heritage register.
Yeah.
Right? So we didn't designate any of them. So one of those houses, which actually looks very similar to yours,
probably, yeah,
was recently torn down.
Yeah.
So what they did was they applied for the demolition permit. The city said, yep, we don't see any need to designate. And then they demolished it and moved on with their property. This doesn't actually create any negative restrictions on you as a property owner.
No, but it might change the value of what I'm going to get for the place if I sell it. If there's a condition on tearing it down.
It won't.
So are you saying that you're not going to designate it and you're going to delete it off your list?
But it being on the list doesn't mean it's designated.
Well, it's on your list. I'd like it to be taken off. If it doesn't, why not take it off now?
I mean, there's someone that recently, a resident of mine, asked for their house to be taken off the list. The reality is their home was already on the reference list for the past 20, 30 years, and they had no idea. And they bought the house in that time. It had no impact on the property value. It had no impact on their ability to buy or sell the property. This isn't the... We keep hearing the same argument all day, and we're going to hear it for the next 2-3 hours.
If you keep hearing the same argument, maybe somebody's trying to tell you something.
No, I think people aren't paying attention to what this said to them. This isn't the negative impact you think it is.
Well, there's a condition on my house. That's negative.
There's not.
There is. You say, I got to give you 60 days notice to tear it down.
If you demolish it. Do you have plans to demolish it anytime soon?
So this is all taken off of the board? If I sell it to somebody else, they don't have this condition on it?
No, it's still there if they want it demolished.
Oh, so it's still there. So there's a condition, and I'd like it taken off.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much,
When will I
Mr.
find
Smith.
out?
I want to ask staff, were you aware is this a new objection that we're hearing this morning, or aware of it previously?
Thank you, Chair. This property was proposed for addition to the register this year, so I heard about the objection at our information session in Orleans in May, so I'm aware of the objection.
Okay, and do you see any need for reassessment for this property?
No. reviewed the property at the info session and determined it still meets the criteria for addition to the list.
Mr. Smith, I would encourage you to reach out to staff, and if you have any questions about what the list is, about how it may or may not affect your property, I'd encourage you to reach out to staff and encourage you to meet with them or set up a phone call so they can explain
I already
the implications
understand
of the list.
what all this is about. It was get my house taken off of the list.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next delegation. Lara Waite from 93 Glebe Avenue, followed by Huang Lam and Din Young. Good morning, Lara.
Hello.
And it's 93 Glebe Avenue?
93 Glebe Avenue.
All right.
Yes. Yes, my name is Lara Waite. I'm the owner of 93 Glebe Avenue. I bought this house.
Microphone. We're having some issues this morning with our microphones. Thank you.
Yeah, my late husband and I bought this house in 93, and it was a lovely house looking on the park, and we really loved it. But unfortunately, the side yard of the house next to us was separated and sold to a couple that didn't really mean to live there. They just built a huge 9,000 square feet house. My house is 1,600 square feet, 60 centimeters from us and from my balcony. You have my letter and all the pictures of it. So that house completely hovers over our house, and you cannot see us anymore. At the front, my main door was on the side, so it's completely covered. And now, looking at the wall, this couple built this huge house and then resold it. Now it's resold to American Embassy, and they made 12 bedroom, 12 bathroom, swimming pool. It's like a huge wall with all the exhaust system from all the bathrooms, and I mean, and my bedroom looks right on that wall from the balcony. And all the odors, everything, and the massive air conditioning that is humming all the time because it's so close. If you have my letter and all the pictures so you can see. And I had lots of condolences from people in the Glebe, but nobody was defending me and defending us at that point. And we couldn't really do anything about it. So it was under intensification. So they completely destroyed our house. We cannot use the front door because the light is completely, there is no sun coming because of this massive, it's like 12-meter wall. And so for 6 months of winter, we cannot use front door because it's almost like, it's not a skating rink, it's more like iceberg there. It's like totally impossible. And it's only 60 centimeters from us. So on the other side, there's also a house that is pretty big, and it's a very small, narrow driveway. So it's also like a lawn skating rink that we're using now. I use this, my husband died, and I use this entrance. So finally, I wanted to sell the house last year. And this registry, just I received the notification about registry, and I had people who wanted to redevelop because my 1,600 square feet, 1.5 little house in between two big houses, especially the one on the west that is together with basement is 12,000 square feet, and my little house 1,600. So I have practically 2.5 bedroom, and my bedroom and my balcony and my front door looks on that wall. So when people come, they, like if I would be younger, I would probably do the same, to have front door in front of the house, so then you can at least use it, and there'll be sun there, so maybe it will melt the ice, because now it's impossible. I fell twice on it because it's so slippery, and there's no way to. My house is almost 100 years old, so all the wood is deteriorated, a big hole in it, and it's completely the stucco deteriorated. My basement, it's a radiator, so it's cold like in winter now, and the plumber told me it will cost a lot of money to change, or practically impossible. They didn't know how. It's an old system. So next to me now is a little hotel, practically. Before it was 8-bedroom, now it's more than 12, and with all the bathrooms and all the facilities. So when people come to see my house, lots of comments where that big house hovers over the little. So it's actually changed the look of the street, because now it's very funny, this big, huge, massive house that was allowed.
I'll have to ask you to wrap up.
In
We're at
front
the
of
5
me,
minutes.
and my little house in between these two, that you practically don't see my house. It's completely blocked. So some time ago, 8 years ago, again, it was put forward to put me as a heritage house, and then I was exempted because David Chernushenko was advocating.
I'll have to stop you there, Ms. Waite. Are there questions from the committee about, for the delegate or for staff on this one? Councillor Tierney?
Sorry, it was just the last thing the delegation said, that former Councillor David Chernushenko, is that correct? Had this property exempted? And if so, why is it back in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this property was proposed as part of the Clemo Estate East Heritage Conservation District back in, I want to say 2011. And there were several buildings removed from the boundary of the district at that time, but that was proposed for designation. This is a different process.
I had the same argument then like I have now. Nothing changed for me. I'm still punished 3 times because
So Madam, I actually, just to save time for the committee here, I just want to get right to the answers here. So have you worked with your new councillor for the area, Councillor Menard, and asked him to speak to staff as well, like David Chernushenko did? You have a new city councillor, Sean Menard.
Yes, I didn't. I went to see Sean Menard, but I only spoke with his assistant. So, and Sean Menard said he'll be not against me, but that's true assistant. I know that I talked to him. But I said that it's the 3rd time I'm going through this stressful situation because nobody wants to buy my house.
Councillor McKenney has a question. Councillor?
Now nobody in the Gleam, they come and they look, and they say it's too small for a family or for anybody, and too much renovation. Sorry.
To staff, could you just explain for everyone around the table here what is the difference between an addition to a conservation district and what is compared to an addition to a heritage inventory, please?
Thank you, Councillor. As Cass had mentioned in the presentation, there is a big difference between designation and register. So the designation of a building means that council approval is required prior to additions, alterations, demolition of the building. If the building is demolished, there are requirements in terms of what can go in its place, that sort of thing. Whereas for the register, the only as you've heard, is the 60 days notice in advance of demolition of the property.
Okay.
I had people walking in and just saying, what about the heritage? And they just walk away. They don't want to jump through. And the big monster was built on the same lot like...
Thank you, Ms. Waite. I know this is difficult for you. Again, I would encourage you again to reach out with your real estate agent to Councillor Menard and suggest that you have a meeting together and to better understand what this heritage register is. And I would encourage you to reach out to Councillor Menard. I know he'd be very interested to meet with you on this in person again.
Really?
Thank you very much. We have our next delegation is Huang Lam and Din Young. Are they here today? Okay. We have Michael Pauloin. Good morning, Michael. I understand you're representing two different clients with properties on this list, on three different properties. So I have you for 130 Albert, as well as 339, 341 Gloucester Street. So those are two.
130 Albert, 177 Victoria.
Okay.
Those are owned by a single client, and the Gloucester Street is a separate client. So
okay. Well,
while
let's
I
start with
understand you do have time limits, if I could have a little more than the 5 minutes.
Well,
I'd be
let's start
grateful.
with 130 Albert Street. We'll start with that one.
So my comments on 177 Pretoria and 130 Albert are essentially the same. So we've heard a lot of talk today about the nature of the register and its effect. I think it's important. Section 27 of the Act says that the register is to be of property that is cultural heritage and interest, and it's important that we sort of just keep that front and center. As well, there should be a in the register should have a statement of the cultural heritage value or interest of the property and a description of the heritage attributes of the property. So let's just sort of keep that in mind. The ministry on its website, and speaking of the registry, it underlines that. It says to include a property that has not been designated in the municipal register, a municipal council must believe that a property has cultural heritage value or interest and must provide a description that is sufficient to readily identify the property, such as the property street address. Although detailed research and evaluation of the property are not required, it is suggested that a brief rationale be included that explains why a municipal council believes that the property is of cultural heritage value or interest. The municipality may want to consider the criteria for determining cultural heritage value or interest in Ontario Regulation 9 of 06 under the Ontario Heritage Act. It then refers you to the Heritage Toolkit, which is published by the ministry and with which staff will be familiar. The toolkit then underlines that a statement explaining the cultural heritage value or interest of the property and a description of the heritage attributes of the property is required. It's interesting when you get through the toolkit, what you find out, and this is really important for us to bear in mind, is that the designation or the listing of property under the on the register is not as benign as it has been portrayed today. It is in fact a tripwire. The 60 days notice is to give the municipality time to further consider whether a designation under the under Part 4 of the Act is required. That's the reason for the notice period. And in fact, I heard reference to the strategic initiative. The report that was issued by staff on June 28, 2016, by the then acting Deputy City Manager, Mr. Moser, says at page 3, inclusion on this register does not offer the protection associated with a designation. However, it provides staff, it provides a 60-day delay on the issuance of a demolition permit, providing heritage staff with time to initiate designation. That's what this is. And when I confronted staff with the notion that this was a tripwire, they denied it. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the criteria set out in the regulation, but I will refer back to compliance with the regulation as I get to the properties. Now, I asked staff in our discussions with them for everything they had on these properties that justified inclusion. What I was provided with was the property information sheet on both 130 Albert and 177 Pretoria. It's a one-page document that does not speak to cultural heritage, value, or interest. It describes the building. It describes the style, but it does not in any way provide anything in the nature of a justification for cultural heritage, value, or interest. And I asked for it so that I could come here today and so that I could provide the materials that have already been distributed on these properties to the committee. But that's true about 130 Albert, and it's true about 177 Pretoria. It doesn't mention the architect. It doesn't mention why these properties are seen to be appropriate to be included on the register. So that's all I had. So what we did was we did staff's work for them. And we went out and we retained 2 consultants. Now, Mr. Podolsky has declared interest because we retained him on this. And his letter, I believe, has been distributed to this committee for today. In it, Mr. Podolsky observes the following. He says, using the city's heritage evaluation criteria and the FHBRO policy of evaluating buildings 40 years or older, we carried out a preliminary survey of the subject area and found at least 13 other mid-century modern buildings that have equivalent characteristics to the 10 buildings identified by city staff. This is about 130 Albert and the downtown core. These buildings, however, were excluded from being recommended for addition to the Heritage Register. He says, our preliminary finding is that the exclusion of the 13 mid-century modern buildings identified above and the proposed addition of the 10 mid-century modern buildings to the register, including 130 Albert, raises questions about the comprehensiveness and consistency of the City of Ottawa's heritage research and evaluation process. He then goes on to say, in our view, until a comprehensive inventory and evaluation of mid-century modern architecture is undertaken by the City of Ottawa and using heritage evaluation criteria appropriate to modern architecture, the current city staff proposal for adding the 10 mid-century modern buildings to the Heritage Register appears to be arbitrary and cannot be easily justified. He provided,
wrap it up,
I have provided to you maps of those. We then
got 30 seconds, Mr. Cullen.
I'm talking about 2 properties, Mr. Chair. We then commissioned Letourneau Heritage Consulting, Inc. to do a study of both properties. That study has been provided to you. The bottom line on the study is that Mr. Letourneau and his people did evaluate against the criteria contained in the reg. He concluded by saying that, A, yes, it's brutalism, but it's a bad example of brutalism. It was designed by Craig and Kohler at a time when Mr. Craig had basically sold out and was just designing buildings as cheaply as he could. The essence of it is that this building is clad in the vinyl siding of its day. And he concludes by saying it does not meet the criteria. There is no heritage interest in 130 Albert. Similarly, he did an analysis of 177 Pretoria and reaches the same conclusion. It does not satisfy any of the criteria and is not deserving of inclusion on the register.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pollan. I want to make sure we have a chance for our committee members to have some questions. So
one last thing. We did commission a planning study as well by FOTEN, and what FOTEN concludes in the planning study is that to place a cloud on the title of this property in this way will interfere with the fulfillment of the city's planning objectives for this area of Centertown.
There's nothing going on the title, but Councillor Shirelli. Oh, yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can I address that? That's not correct.
Okay,
Really?
my first question would be, do you have any indication that something would go on title or be analogous to being on title?
Yes.
Can
So
you expand on that?
So the register is available online. Any careful purchaser or lender on property will do research on the content of the register. It is not specifically on title, but it is a cloud on the title in the manner that a real estate lawyer would consider it, because the use and redevelopment of this property is hindered by registration on the title. So is it strictly speaking on title to the property? No, but it constitutes part of anything, a part of the off-title searches that any careful lawyer will do at the time of the purchase or lending on this property.
Okay, and what do you think are the deficiencies in the city's approach given the constraints we're under with this act and what's passed at council?
So what the ministry has said is that there has to be an indication of cultural heritage value or interest. There is nothing that, and I've asked for everything that staff had, and they gave me this package. Avery sent the package to me. All they have are the one-page information sheets that were sent out with the notices, and these two, and the third that I will speak to, do not contain any mention of cultural heritage value or interest. None. So I can only conclude that the work wasn't done or that it wasn't disclosed to me.
On the last point, do staff have a comment on that?
Chair, the package that was sent to Mr. Pollowin also contained a neighborhood heritage statement in addition to the property information sheets. And just a quick clarification, our property information sheets did include the architect's name for one of the addresses. It also includes if the properties were located on the previous heritage reference list or not. And in this case, I think one property is on the previous list and one is not. And perhaps I'll...
The previous list is a different type of list.
Certainly, but in terms of the idea, is it on, can a diligent buyer or a lawyer find that information out? We did have that.
But it has no effect.
Correct. So anyhow, I'm going to ask Leslie Collins to address the other part of your question, Councillor. Oh.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the other part of the question was about whether or not we had a statement of cultural heritage value for these properties. And it's my belief, and I would leave it to legal to confirm this, but that is not required under 27.1.1 of the Act, which relates to designated properties. For properties that are not designated but listed, there is no requirement for that statement of cultural heritage value.
Councillor Shirley?
Well, I was going to move a motion to exempt 130 Albert from the list, but I still need more information from legal on that, and I need direction from you as to when that would happen. I just want to congratulate the speaker for being on topic, because these are more of the issues that we were looking at.
So you're looking for when, well, we're doing a motion at the end of all the delegations collecting any properties that we believe should be deferred to the fall. So that would be in order at the end of the delegations. Yeah. And would legal have comment on? Would staff like to comment on this particular file in terms of deferral?
Mr. Chair, first I would like to confirm Ms. Collins' point that there is no statement explaining the cultural heritage value or interest of the property that's required for non-designated properties that go on the list. And then referral, ask what the specific question was. I couldn't hear it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And just to, well, we can bring that up at the end of the meeting, but Mr. Pollan was presenting on 3 properties. So is it all 3 that you're seeking deferral for? Okay. Member Quinn.
Mr. Pollan, thank you for your presentation today. You did make the point that any lawyer or prospective property owner doing due diligence would undertake research that they would be able to ascertain whether or not the property was on the register or not. But wouldn't that same due diligence indicate that being on the register is not as restrictive as you've indicated? It is really about the 60-day notice required prior to demolition.
So, coming from Mr. Moser's pen, in a report to Planning Committee and Council in 2016, he says the only reason for the 60 days is to act as a tripwire for future designation. So the issue is, Mr. Collins is quite right that development in the core is a complicated matter, and there's lots of time that's chewed up in that. However, there is a chill that will be put on the property by virtue of the fact that being contained in the register suggests that there is cultural heritage value or interest in this property, which could lead to designation. And with the greatest of respect to my friend Ms. Enta, she's simply wrong. The ministry says a municipal council must believe that a property has cultural heritage value or interest and provide a description that is sufficient to readily identify the property. It is suggested that a brief rationale be included that explains why a municipal council believes that the property is of cultural heritage value or interest. And this is specific to those properties not designated under Parts 4 or Part 5. It's non-designated properties on the register. The ministry's own words on its website.
Okay, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pollan, for your presentation. It has raised a few questions, but I just want to be clear. Like on page 9 of the report, when I read it, it actually does say that, as per council approved the procedures, that they use the 60 days to further assess the property's cultural heritage value against the Ontario regulation to determine if it merits designation under Part 4. So I think that Mr. Moser's words are in the report. I think just to be fair, that is something that, of course, we're aware of. That's what the 60 days is meant to do. It's a pause, but also just want to recognize, and I maybe get your opinion. I mean, since the register, since we've adopted the register in 2016, we've had 10 notices of intent to demolish, and all 10 have been approved. So I just, I just want to make sure that we're clear that those two things are addressed in this report, and that to date, all 10 have had. So I think that, certainly for me as a councillor, a member of Built Heritage, I do like the pause. I think of it more as a pause than a tripwire, but I do like the pause so that we can look at a property and ensure that we're not taking down anything that should be designated. I don't think that we always move ahead quickly enough with designation, but also I just want to point out that we do allow for demolition. To date, there's been nothing to demonstrate that won't happen, or that there's a decrease in the value of the property, or any of the concerns that we hear when we put something on a registry.
Can I treat that as a question, Mr. Chair?
Sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. over my career, I've acted literally on the purchase of thousands of properties, or their sale, or their financing. I can tell you that without any doubt in my mind that in the doing of due diligence, the notion that a property is on the register and runs the risk of designation, leaving aside the whole issue of demolition, runs the risk of a formal designation, will have a chilling effect on the willingness of a buyer to purchase it, the willingness of a lender to lend on it. If there is any thought of redevelopment in their mind, it absolutely will, and there is no question, and it will also have a negative effect on the appraisal of properties when those appraisals are being done for the purposes of lending.
Please hold the applause in the committee. Councillor McKenney, that's it. Councillor Brockington.
I think in the interest of time, the councillor has highlighted the points I was going to raise, so we'll just move on.
I wanted to ask two clarification questions to staff. Mr. Paulin brought up the fact that several similar buildings were not added to this list. Is there a general reason why some buildings may have been, I think as he put it, missed? And what would be the process for evaluating those in the future?
Mr. Podolsky actually said excluded.
The methodology that was used in Centertown, in this area of the business district just south of Parliament, staff photographed and assessed quite a number of properties. This wasn't meant to be an inventory of all of the mid-century modern buildings or all of the tall towers in downtown. This was a rigorous process where we reviewed every property against both the design and the context, and the ones that met both are brought forward today. In the event that perhaps there's an error and that some have been missed, we certainly take the suggestion, and we plan to review these properties in advance of the fall report.
And there's three properties that Mr. Paulin is addressing: 130 Albert, 339, 341 Gloucester Street, and 177 Pretoria. You're aware of all these in advance because we have received correspondence. Are there any that you would recommend off of that list that may be deferred to the fall?
I would recommend the Gloucester Street properties. Those were new, the new information I think was brought forward last night or this morning. Yeah, so we'd like some time on those.
So based on new information, you're recommending the Gloucester Street addresses be reassessed?
Oh, pardon me. The Gloucester addresses, because of the time frame, we haven't had a chance to reevaluate yet, and it sounds like that's an interest.
And my last question is for our legal staff, just in terms of some of the concerns raised around the ministry guidelines or direction. How has our methodology or our process addressed the requirements from the province in terms of identifying the list and evaluating properties?
Mr. Chair, with all due respect to my friend, Mr. Paulin, I think it is important that the committee understand the accuracy of the statements that the ministry has provided. And so the website, which I have open in front of me, says that for properties designated under Part 4, and that is not what we are speaking about today, we are speaking about non-designated, but for designated properties, a statement explaining the cultural, heritage, value, or interest of the property and a description of its heritage attributes are provided. Now, Mr. Paulin did speak to my point on the non-designated properties, and what the ministry says on that is that to include a property that has not been designated in the municipal register, a municipal council must believe that a property has cultural heritage, value, or interest, and provide a description that is sufficient to readily identify the property, such as the property's street address. And that is what staff has done. The ministry then goes on to say, although detailed research and evaluation of the property are not required, it is suggested that a brief rationale be included that explains why a municipal council believes that the property is of cultural heritage, value, or interest, which is, I believe, the statements that staff provided to Mr. Paulin. In addition, Mr. Chair, if I may, because I do believe that clarification is important, as is accuracy, my friend spoke to Mr. Moser's statement in a planning report, and I have that planning report in front of me. And what Mr. Moser said upon the creation of the comprehensive inventory of heritage resources is that this study will lead to the creation of a comprehensive inventory of heritage resources. As part of this heritage inventory project, selected resources constructed prior to 1980 will be researched, photographed, and evaluated. After evaluation and subsequent approval from the Built Heritage Subcommittee, Planning Committee, and Council at that time, the city's heritage register will be updated. Inclusion on this register does not offer the protection associated with the designation. However, it provides a 60-day delay on the issuance of a demolition permit, providing heritage staff with time to initiate designation if appropriate. At no point did Mr. Moser ever suggest that this was a tripwire or a stepping stone to designation, only that it is a tool to be used under the Act, and that staff has followed that process as identified by Council appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on at this point. Thank you, Mr. Palouin. Gloucester, very quickly, because you've certainly met your limit here in terms of time. So very quickly on Gloucester.
For the sake of turning it off, I can make myself heard.
Gloucester, by the way, which staff are already recommending that we defer to the fall. Do you still need to speak on it even with that recommendation from staff?
What Gloucester has in common with the other two properties is that, contrary to what Ms. Enta just read, or just said, there is no indication of why any of these three properties are of cultural heritage value or interest. And I will leave you with this. If staff and the committee are confident that these, the inclusion of these properties on the register will stand up, then I invite all of it to be deferred until the fall, for the reason that in the fall, under Bill 108, any of the property owners affected by this will have appeal rights to the local planning appeal tribunal. Whereas if it's adopted, you're shaking your head, you're wrong. Okay? They will have appeal rights to the local planning appeal tribunal, whereas anything that council does prior to that may not.
Thank you very much. Our next delegation is Gabrielle Marchand-Dauphin and Danielle Gratton. Let's hold the applause, please, in our committee meetings. Gabrielle Marchand-Dauphin and Danielle Gratton, 50 Maple Lane. Following that, Gurinder Singh Gill. Good morning. And I understand you are speaking for 50 Maple Lane. Is that correct? Okay.
Can we speak in French?
Oh yes, absolutely. En français, bien sûr.
Tu veux-tu l'avoir plus proche? Je sais pas s'il fonctionne. Il veut pas nous entendre.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Tout d'abord, je désire mentionner que la congrégation Les Sœurs de la Charité d'Ottawa, sont la congrégation qu'on représente, sont les propriétaires du 50 Maple Lane. La congrégation est surprise et un peu déçue de la position de la Ville de répertorier des propriétés qui semblent ne pas avoir d'intérêt patrimonial ou que très peu. Selon nous, cela diminue la valeur du registre en ajoutant de telles propriétés comme le 50 Maple Lane, qui, selon nous, ne mérite pas l'intérêt patrimonial dont il fait l'objet. Donc, je vais laisser ma collègue vous présenter.
Donc, on m'entend bien? Donc, aujourd'hui, on est évidemment ici pour réitérer notre demande de retrait de la propriété du 50 Maple Lane du registre d'inventaire patrimonial de la Ville d'Ottawa.
En plus de l'ensemble des arguments qu'on vous a apportés avec notre lettre du 28 mai dernier, on va parler aujourd'hui de l'identité culturelle, des altérations qui ont été faites à la propriété et le couvent n'est pas unique. Donc, le couvent Mont-Saint-Joseph, il se voit attribuer une valeur culturelle qu'il n'a pas parce qu'on néglige de reconnaître l'importance historique de la maison mère. Lorsqu'on connaît les communautés religieuses, on sait que la maison mère, c'est l'épicentre. C'est là qu'il y a le bagage culturel. Tout s'y trouve. D'ailleurs, notre maison mère, elle est désignée au sens de la loi sur le patrimoine de l'Ontario. Donc, les arguments ressortis sur le plan culturel supposent que le Mont-Saint-Joseph a été regardé de manière isolée et sans prendre en considération l'ensemble du parc immobilier des Sœurs de la Charité d'Ottawa. Donc, le mont, on y attribue une valeur culturelle qu'il ne devrait pas avoir. Maintenant, pour un peu l'effet visuel, le mont se trouve à gauche, le couvent Mont-Saint-Joseph, et de l'autre côté, vous avez la maison mère. Pour bien exprimer notre propos, on a ressorti certains des arguments qui nous ont été avancés par l'équipe en patrimoine de la Ville au niveau de l'identité culturelle. On n'aura pas le temps aujourd'hui de passer au travers l'ensemble du tableau, mais j'aimerais quand même porter à votre attention que c'est un couvent privé, c'est un service qui est réservé aux religieuses. Il n'y a donc aucun accès au public pour cette bâtisse-là. Et son apport au niveau du développement pédagogique, mais c'est seulement 9 ans sur 48 ans d'existence de cette bâtisse-là. Donc, réellement, pour le public, cette bâtisse-là elle a eu peu d'impact au niveau de la communauté. Maintenant, on va parler un peu de Louis-J. Lapierre, qui est l'architecte. Donc, d'un côté, vous voyez le mont, construction 1961. De l'autre côté, vous voyez un centre des loisirs, Monseigneur Pigeon, de 1958. Donc, nous, ce qu'on dit, c'est que l'architecte n'a pas innové dans la création de cet espace-là et la propriété, elle n'a rien d'avant-gardiste au niveau moderne. Et quand on le compare au centre des loisirs, bien, on peut voir, là, il y a une réflexion sur la lumière, il y a une la mosaïque même, elle est d'intérêt. Au Mont-Saint-Joseph, c'est une école, c'est banal. Ensuite, on va parler des altérations. Donc ça, on en a déjà parlé avec l'équipe en patrimoine, mais bon, on a le parterre qui était un amphithéâtre pour les étudiantes, puis lors du changement de vocation, bien, définitivement, ça a été rempli, donc, et le changement des fenêtres qui s'est effectué au fil des années. Ces deux éléments-là, bien, ça diminue énormément le style architectural moderne qu'on attribue à cette bâtisse-là pour l'insérer au registre d'inventaire du patrimoine. Maintenant, au niveau de la brique, bien, on a toute une bannière qui a été remplacée sur plusieurs façades de la bâtisse. L'état de détérioration, elle est avancée. Et donc, le motif, la mosaïque, devrais-je dire, elle est en train de disparaître. Graduellement, au fil des années, elle va être remplacée. Et on parle aussi de murets. À l'époque, il y en avait 3. Il y en a déjà un qui a été détruit. Et on peut vous dire que les 2 autres qui restent sont dans un état de détérioration avancé. Donc, finalement, le dernier point, c'est de dire, bien, le modèle du mont, il est commun, il est ordinaire et il a été utilisé partout où les Sœurs de la Charité se sont implantées. On va regarder rapidement les attributs architecturaux du mont. Donc, on en a parlé, 1961, moderniste, Louis-J. Lapierre, c'est de la brique. On voit l'élévation. Un demi-sous-sol, premier étage, deuxième étage. Remarquez les fenêtres, c'est la symétrie et bien entendu l'intégration au paysage de la bâtisse. Donc ça, c'est principalement les arguments qui ont été utilisés par l'équipe en patrimoine pour lister notre propriété. Maintenant, sur le territoire de la Ville d'Ottawa, on a une autre propriété qui est la maison Notre-Dame-la-Providence. Même année de construction, c'est le modernisme. On a des motifs de briques brunes et beige, encore une fois. L'élévation est sensiblement la même. Les fenêtres sont aussi symétriques et on peut bien voir là qu'il y a une intégration aussi au paysage. Donc celle-là, elle est similaire, mais elle a été rejetée par l'équipe en patrimoine. La même chose, un autre bâtisse qui peut se ressembler, qui est un peu plus petite, mais encore une fois, le style moderne, les fenêtres regroupées symétriques, et puis on tient quand même à vous dire que malgré le fait qu'il y a peu
We're at our time, you'll have to finish
OK.
up.
Donc, ici, je vous montrais d'autres propriétés des serres, mais finalement, en conclusion, ce qu'on veut dire, c'est que le symbole historique, il est à la maison mère, et c'est d'ailleurs pourquoi elle est désignée. Les éléments architecturaux d'intérêt, ils sont appelés à disparaître, ceux qui sont d'intérêt pour le couvent Mont-Saint-Joseph, et réellement, le style et la forme, c'est pas unique. Donc, on questionne pourquoi notre propriété, celle-ci, a été ciblée par le projet.
Okay, merci. Are there questions from committee members? Member Quinn.
Merci, mesdames. Ma question, c'est pour Cass. Just in response to the question of why this example of religious institution buildings that were presented to us as opposed to the others, if you had, just giving you an opportunity to elaborate on that decision.
Hi, thank you for the question. My understanding from the ones suggested is that there are many other examples. For this project, we were looking at many examples of modern buildings. It was an international movement. There's buildings all across the world that show these attributes of modern design. In the case for the property, I think it was out on in Orleans area. I believe that's up a steep hill and behind a wooded and gated area, so I don't think we would have had a chance to see it from the street. We tend not to trespass on private property, so we wouldn't have had a chance to do that. And perhaps if we had photos or had looked at it, we may have made another assessment, but I do think we've discussed it with you in the past, and I don't think that we found the same attributes were there. And so in this one, I think it's mainly the mosaics and some of the special features of the Rockcliffe, I want to say Rockcliffe Park, but Linden Lee, Maple Lane example. But anyhow, I didn't quite catch the full question, so if there's anything else, let me know.
Thank you. Merci.
Any other questions from our committee? I wanted to ask staff, so I believe you're aware of this objection prior to today's meeting, is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we had a request for reassessment in 2018 as well.
Okay, and it has been reassessed, and you still believe it meets the design and context criteria?
Yes.
And is there anything from today's presentation, a very good presentation, that any new information that would, you believe, would cause reason to do another assessment?
No.
Not in this case, okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Merci beaucoup. Our next delegation is Gurinder Singh Gill, and then Chris Greenshields is on the list after that. And this is at 9074 Mitch Owens Road, is that correct? All right, so if you can press the red button.
It's not.
No, go back to your usual.
Okay, all right.
And you'll have 5 minutes to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Vice Chair. First of all, I would like to say thank you to CAS for providing me some information. This information came to me only a few days ago because I'm the new owner of the property since November, and I have no idea this project is going on. So I would like to thank the committee to let me present and my perspective about this property. And at the same time, I thank you staff, and the thank you media, and the thank you public to let me in front of you. And just about this property, I'm here for 9074 Mitch Owens Road. And it is a farmhouse, and the house on this farm is under this proposal. This is my understanding, but please help me clarify if something is different. So this farmhouse, on conversation with the owner, believed to be built in 1867 when our Canada was born. This is a very historical touch to this building and this house, and I'm glad to have this house. And I became the new owner of this property on November 1st, 2018, so about 6-7 months ago. And at this time, during the negotiation, actually the owner told me the complete history of this house for the last 5 generations. His family came to this house, and this house was built before they purchased this property in 1905. He was very much attached to this property because he was living in 5 generations. He knows it, and those families from Ireland. And a family name is Patterson. And at that time, he was so much attached to the property. I said, you know, Mr. Patterson, I will keep a Patterson family name alive in this property somehow. This is my promise to you, and I will do that. And this promise will never go away. Yes, I will do that. This is my internal satisfaction about the history of this property. And to me, being a farmer from India, and I wanted to always continue the same tradition here in Canada as well, and my father as well, so that's why we end up buying this property. There is no intentions for development or anything. No, we wanted a farmhouse, and we want to build a new house or keep the farm as going for a generation. My generation, at least. I don't know my next generation. But at the same time, I just want to say, so that's how I would like to preserve the value and give a life to this house again, or as a property as a whole. But at the same time, this project comes in. I didn't know this before, and I believe, to me, this project is preserving the extrinsic value of the property, not the intrinsic. That's how they're attached to this house or the property. To me, this project is becoming an obstruction for me to preserve the value, the intrinsic value they're attached to modify this property. So how are you going to do it? I have no idea, but there are ideas. I would like to modify something about this property so I can give a life to this property. And once again, it's a farmhouse of a 21st century. It's the same farmhouse. To me, you know, as humans, we always put a face value to something rather than forgetting, to me, like the value that the humans have inside their mind. So to me, like, you know, we are always kind of, nature has given us a heritage. A forest is a heritage. We will demolish the forest, and we will build a new something for us that we love to have it. This is a kind of a heritage, and to me, I disagree with that one. At the same time, I think, to me, I request the committee to once again reassess this house. This house, to me, even though my intention was to keep this house is in such a poor condition that it will sink in its own basement in probably less than a year or 2 years. This summer, I had a chance to visit this house once again, because in the winter I could not go onto the farm. This house basement was full of water, and there were so many holes in the basement.
Wrap it up, please.
Yes. Okay. There were so many holes in the basement, so that this house has to come down. You know, as to me, like everything on this earth, it's a nature's rule, has to come down. We all, as even human beings, came out of the earth. Earth is an element, one of us, and we have to go back into the earth. I think this house has a time to go back into the earth, become an element again. And even the owner of this house, the original owner of this house, told me, Gurinder, this is the time to move on. You won't be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gove. Thank you for your presentation.
And thank you. Let me.
Do we have?
And I will request
You'll have to, we're out of time, sir. So do we have any questions from the committee members on this one? Are staff aware of this objection? Is this the first time you're hearing of this objection?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I spoke with Mr. Gill last week about this, yeah, for the first time.
And would you have a recommendation this would require reassessment at this time?
If there's a request to reassess, we would entertain it. Condition is not one of our criteria, so unless there's new information about the property in terms of alterations, et cetera, I don't imagine our position would change.
So Mr. Gill's concern about the condition of the home, if it would need to be altered or even demolished someday, this, by putting it on this register, would not prevent him from pursuing any other process?
That's correct.
Well, because I'm looking for a clear recommendation from staff here. Do you recommend that this is reassessed as part of the fall process?
I wouldn't recommend it, Chair. I think given that it was mostly based on the condition, condition is, the request to reassess is based on condition. Condition is not one of our criteria, so I wouldn't recommend a reassessment.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for staff? Okay,
So it needs
thank
to
you,
be
Mr. Gill.
reassessed? May I
The
clarify?
staff is recommending that it not be reassessed. So thank you very much for your presentation. Our next delegation is Chris Greenshields, followed by Renzo Calvano. And Mr. Greenshields is representing the Vanier Community Association, but I don't think not any particular property on this, just general comments?
I do own a property that is proposed for the listing. My wife and I fully support it. I'm, however, focusing my remarks on behalf of the community and the general issues related to built heritage in Vanier. First, I'd like to congratulate city staff for their work reflected in their report. It has been almost 20 years since amalgamation, and this catch-up is important for community groups such as the VCA. We lost in those years much of the heritage planning and community initiatives of the former city of Vanier. As discussed with staff, we hope that city heritage staff will expand their work on the Vanier neighborhood, and the VCA is ready to help. Founded after amalgamation to preserve Vanier's heritage, the Vanier Museo Park may also play a role. One technical observation: to correct the maps and listings presented to the subcommittee today, which are labeled and organized incorrectly. A significant area of the Vanier community, Kingsview Park, has been taken out of Vanier and included with other neighborhoods. The Rideau Riverside and the former railway industrial lands which demarcate Kingsview Park are important parts of Vanier's heritage, as is Kingsview Park's post-war development, a pet project of the then Eastview mayor to be the Rock Cliff of Eastview, which marks Vanier's land use policies in a period before it was surrounded by the city of Ottawa. The general descriptions of Kingsview Park and the rest of Vanier in the staff report reflect this reasonably well and should be included together in describing Vanier as a whole. We welcome the proposed additions of Vanier built heritage to Ottawa's Heritage Register. At this time, we consider important the inclusion of 94 beechwood, noted in the Beechwood Community Design Plan as a key design influence for the St. Charles Church sector of this plan. And we recommend that it be considered for heritage designation and protection, as was done for St. Charles Church. As we recognize Vanier's 110th founding and its 50th name change anniversaries, we would like to see research to confirm the heritage listing, which appears to be the original Eastview Town Hall at 90 Montreal Road. This was used starting in 1909 at the founding of Vanier. The staff report notes 333 Montreal Road by the Vanier architect Roger Thibault, but does not include the property in the proposed listings. We have suggested to city staff other possible properties and that they review the work available in the city archives, the work of Donald Morse, a senior member of Vanier's planning department, concerning other heritage properties, including the oldest known Vanier residence, dated 1871 at 73 Barrette. This work also covers proposals to designate heritage conservation districts, including the areas of Barrette, Aymont, and Palace Streets. Finally, I would like to note that the VCA is working with partners on several built heritage projects, first to commemorate Vanier's Franco-Ontarian heritage, to repurpose the Franco-Ontarian ironwork to be replaced as part of the Montreal Road Revitalization Project, and secondly, to commemorate Vanier's industrial heritage, to obtain and dedicate a part of the Alexandria Bridge structure fabricated at the former Vanier Works of the Dominion Bridge Company when the bridge is replaced in coming years. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Greenshields. Any questions for delegation? Oh, Member Conforti, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenshields. Your presentation reminded me of something I also noticed in the report under the Carlton Heights area. You described some attributes, and you noted that small clusters of wartime houses, especially along Argue Drive, when you described those, but then there are no properties on the list on Argue Drive. So will there be a chance to look at these sort of anomalies and readdress these in the fall? Giving the subcommittee a chance to look at these details a little bit more carefully?
Certainly, we do have a lot of time to take another look at things. That's a big part of our process. And through the annual maintenance report, we are expecting to see an evolution of the Heritage Register in the years to come. In terms of the Neighborhood Heritage Statement attributes, that is meant to be a description of that study area and describes the area, its history, and its development. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of those properties meet our design test and are recommended in the report. But certainly we'd be happy to have some feedback from you, or could set up a meeting to have a look, because I do think our city's so enormous and expansive that we're looking forward to the feedback and happy to take that extra time.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Our next delegation is Renzo Calvano, followed by Yolande Tarnowski. Mr. Calvano is representing 33 Patterson Avenue.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank all the people on your staff that took my phone calls and put up my emails. But anyways, when I bought this property back in the mid-90s, my intent was to demolish the property and move there, and it being my permanent home. Unfortunately, due to employment issues and a very bad stockbroker, my life has changed. So as time marches on, what my intent is probably to sell the property, and it'll represent my my retirement. So when I received the letter from Heritage, it made reference to vernacular construction and the architectural design, red brick, duplex, twin base, all that good stuff. So I asked some questions to Avery and to David and to Eric, and everybody advised me to go to the archives. So I went to Tallwood, and I paid the money, whatever it was, and they pulled some pictures, and pictures only went back to 1990 type of thing, so they couldn't go back any further. When I originally bought the property, the person I bought it from told me that, not him, but the guy he bought it from, modified the roof. So that whole roof is not original to, you know, the building that was bought, like vernacular construction. I looked that up. It's a bunch of farmers that build anything that's around using any type of material that's there. So it's, you know, it's a pretty nice house, but, you know, it's not well put together, I guess. I don't want to say that. So the premise is that the roof is not original, the cedars is not original in the front, the gable ends is not original, and I couldn't find any pictures that showed it going back to the 1900s, 1928, or whatever it was. So my concern is, as Mr. Polowick, which I never know, I just met him today, made reference to the tripwire method, so I don't want to explain that, so I'm concerned about that. Maybe that's the wrong choice of words, but seems to say a lot. So I don't want, the house on the registry, because I'm afraid it'll be transferred onto the designation. So that's my story. It's not an original roof, and that was part of the architecture. Thank you, Avery.
Questions from the committee? I'll ask staff again, my standard question. This objection prior to today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we were made aware of the objection in 2018 and again this year.
And have you done a reassessment, reevaluation?
Yes, both in 2018 and 2019.
I wanted to ask something specific that Mr. Calvano brought up, which is that the lack of evidence, if you will, photographs or drawings of how it might have existed 100 years ago. I hate getting into hypothetical at this committee, but if in the future there was some reason that there was a designation being sought on the property, would you need that kind of evidence? Would staff need that kind of evidence before a designation could occur? Or what kind of evidence would they be looking for? Because I am pretty sure it goes far above and beyond what we're looking at for this particular register list.
I'll take this one, Mr. Chair. You're correct. In terms of a designation, we would do much more in-depth research on the property. Of course, unfortunately, because Ottawa's former City Hall burned down, we don't have access to building permit records from historic building permit records. So in some cases, we are working on our best guess and looking at the building in terms of evidence. But yes, there would be a great deal more research completed as part of an evaluation under OREG 906.
Okay, but in terms of your evaluation on face value of what you're seeing now with the property, it meets the criteria of design and context. If Mr. Calvano 6 months from now discovered some evidence that might show a different build or different design, at that point, would he be able to ask for a reevaluation or ask for staff to have another assessment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, he would be able to do so.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Calvano. We're going to move on now to Yolande Tarnowski at 30 Whippoorwill Drive. And after that, we have Janice Steingass and Gilda Shannon on our speaking list. Do we have Yolande Tarnowski here? This is 30 Whippoorwill Drive in Ward 11. Is this Councillor Tierney's ward? Okay.
I beg your pardon? Are you going to need the second picture also? Yeah, you have another one? Oh, I didn't submit anything. I'm not the one. I got this in the mail. I got this. You sent this to me. Somebody, that's one of my problems.
So if you can press the red button there, and you'll have 5 minutes to present.
I want to make sure that you can hear me clearly because I've missed a lot of information from the beginning. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to speak. I am known to be a most compliant individual. However, in the face of subtle infringement on my privacy, it's a different story. May I mention that I am especially unenchanted with being part of the Heritage Project in the wake of my husband's passing, and I'm asking you to reconsider your decision. After paying taxes on our property for a period of almost 50 years, I am now being pigeonholed into a heritage project with little discussion, with no benefit to me, nor my consent, invading my privacy, seemingly an infringement of human rights, and seemingly so unlike the free country in which I was born. So please consider the following. When I will become ready to place my home for sale, any real estate agent will tell you that the heritage designation is a hindrance rather than an asset. I consider that, very important. Originally, our home was built in Gloucester, not Ottawa. However, your designation does not reveal that aspect. I belonged to Gloucester for many, many years before we were assimilated. Thirdly, one would consider it to be, one may consider it to be somewhat ludicrous to identify our property as being of Ottawa cultural value, since, as much as we have loved our life at 30 Whippoorwill Drive, I need to explain how the model came into being, this particular model. There were certain restrictions that were placed by the City of Gloucester as to the level of living space on this half-acre lot that we needed to abide by. And since I wanted that living space to be all on one level, not on two levels, the model that I chose came from one of those architectural magazines that you buy on the newsstand. And for a few $100s, you could buy that architectural plan. And what I bought was a California ranch style that was then doctored to meet the needs of the Ottawa climate. So it is not reflective at all of an Ottawa-style home of any kind. I do wish to bring your attention, to bring to your attention what I would call a balanced understanding of how our tax money could be better spent. I mean, maybe this is not my area, but I want you to understand that this designated heritage home has had the following inconvenience. In at least the 5 or 6 past winters, as a winter event, that is, that 30 Whippoorwill Drive was being deprived for about 6 or 7 years of a basic need, water, because every winter, due to ruptured pipes on Swansway, at the moment, there is not even a date in sight for repairs to this.
30 seconds left.
Am I done?
30 seconds left.
Oh, well, I want to conclude with the fact that I believe that my home does not meet the criteria for the heritage designation because, first of all, I was told that it was one of a kind, and when I mentioned this to my neighbors in Rothwell Heights, well, it's the biggest joke. They say every house here is one of a kind. Every house is unique in Rothwell Heights. Why pick me? So I honestly don't believe that I fit what you call cultural heritage, and I really would be very happy if I were able to remove myself from this designation.
Thank you very much. I know some of our committee members.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I know Councillor Tierney has some questions.
I certainly do. First of all, thank you for coming out and speaking today, and I asked staff to put up this photo. This is your house, correct? What year is that house?
I beg your pardon?
What year is your home?
What year did you say?
Year.
It was built in December, well, no, we moved in December 1969.
Okay.
So not even quite 50 years yet.
Okay, great. So on that, I'm just going to ask staff, because I was asking about the criteria and the marking systems that are involved in this. What made 30 Whippoorwill fall into this designation? Because I got to be honest, I grew up in a very similar house, brick bungalow, what I see right here. I don't see a lot of heritage value, but I'm not a heritage expert. Was there someone that actually lived within this house? What are the attributes that made it fall into the registry?
It's one of a kind. That's what they tell me.
Thank you, Chair. So we assessed this property and found that it is reflective of vernacular modern architecture of the time period. So you'll see that it's got a symmetrical form. It has a very low-pitched roof. It's got floor-to-ceiling windows, windows in
It's a
the
California style.
windows. In the gable ends, it's got a curtain wall window around the entrance, and then it has the screen wall in front. It's also situated on a corner lot, and it takes up the lot in a way that we found to highlight the design of the building,
And,
among other things.
Great, thank you. And I assume the resident did bring forward the concerns. Is there any opportunity to hold this file from going in at this point and review it again?
Thank you for the question. We've already reassessed the property and found that it meets the criteria for inclusion on the register, so unless there's new information about alterations to the property, we have no reason to reassess it.
And when it comes to who actually did the assessments, I'm kind of curious about that process, just to the residents making note of the cost. That's always a concern too. How is this information collected? Is it by our professional staff? Do you get students to go out within the community? I just want to get a little more information on that, because it does seem quite subjective, and I just want to ensure that, because I got hundreds of these houses all through Beacon Hill North, with very similar characteristics, so of similar age, built by Compo and Minto. So I'm just trying to understand who collected all this information.
For this part of the city, there were two staff doing the fieldwork, Avery and myself.
Okay. And I did have a question. I was following Mr. Paulowin's conversation. Currently at this point, are these, let's say this goes to council, and I will be requesting the information in written format for 14 Rothwell Drive, 26 Davidson Drive, and 30 Whippoorwill prior to City Council to review the scoring myself. Is there an opportunity to be able to appeal this to LPAT or OMB or whatever you want to call it?
I'm going to defer that question to legal.
Pardon, Mr. Chair, if I could ask the councillor to repeat his question.
It was just in question to the fact Mr. Paulowin kind of raised the issue, and I'm thinking about it now. Let's say this passes by City Council. Is there an opportunity to appeal it to LPAT or the OMB?
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Mr. Paulowin was not accurate in Bill 101 received royal assent.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the media would probably prefer if you use the microphone as well as everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Thank you, yes.
Bill 101 recently received royal assent, and although Section 27 was repealed, it was replaced with a section that changes the procedure slightly for designation or non-designated properties being added to the register. And the only thing that did was bring the process more in line with the city's existing process in terms of notification to owners and providing them with an opportunity to object to the addition, which is what we are hearing today. There is nothing in the Act which says that a property that's been added to the Heritage Register that is non-designated will have the ability to appeal it to LPAT. What it did change was under Section 29, which is designated properties. So a property that has been designated is now appealable to the LPAT, whereas previously an objection could be made and that would go to the Conservation Review Board, and then Council's decision would be final. That has changed by Bill 108. Section 27 does not afford an owner the right to go to LPAT as we read the Act. Thank you.
Great, and thank you for the clarification on that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this for days on end. But that being said, I do want to say, I think when Mr. Pollan came up, he's a specialist. He really knows his game. I think the resident that's come in today, would benefit from somebody of Mr. Pollan's caliber if she wanted to go out and get somebody, because you can see the speech he's given today to this committee. I can already sense at least one of the three properties that Mr. Pollan is representing is most likely going to fall off the registry because he's so articulate, so well-spoken, and knows the law. Maybe I would like to see this specific property, 30 Whippoorwill, I'd like to afford the opportunity to the resident to be able to seek the appropriate counsel or someone that could present, because I'm really here helping state the case where I see just a brick bungalow, but I don't have all the nuts and bolts of the Heritage Act to be able to fight back my own city.
Councillor Tierney, one clarification. Staff had recommended the 339, 341 Gloucester be deferred because there was new information presented by Mr. Pollan to staff prior to today's meeting.
One question.
Any of the delegations here are being assessed the same way today. If there's new information or if there's an objection that staff aren't familiar with, they are very open and will make a recommendation to this committee that they reassess and that the addition to the register be deferred until the fall. And I would ask staff, in terms of Ms. Tarnowski's concerns, is there anything new that's been presenting today that would suggest a reassessment is in order to be deferred to the fall?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any information that we were not already aware of today.
And if new information were to be produced next month, the month after, what would the process be in terms of bringing that to staff's attention?
Thank you, Chair. If we were to receive new information related to the property that might impact its ability to meet the design criteria, we would be open to reassessing the property.
Great, and just a quick follow-up if that's okay. So I've already highlighted, and I think it's a matter of record now, if I can get those three properties, the scoring criteria that were put in place prior to City Council. Also, the rationale between about 234 Blackburn and how it came off the registry, and you've already alluded to the factor mentioned. It was based on an email or a phone call, I assume. The individual asked for it to be removed off the registry, and that actually happened. So I just want to say, if we're doing it for some people, why can't we do it for everyone? And I just want some clarity on that. So if staff take time, go back on that and think about it, and if you can provide that information, I'd certainly appreciate it. What council meeting would this hit, Mr. Chair?
This is coming up to the last Wednesday in June, which I believe is the 26th of June.
Great. Thank you for your patience.
Quick question.
We actually need to keep moving on, but do any other committee members have a question or staff delegation?
No.
Unfortunately, no. We have a lot of delegations, and we'll need to move on today. Thank you for your presentation. We have Janice Steingass and Gilda Shannon as our next delegation, and after that, David Fleming. This is number 17 of 26, so 10 or so more. And this, our next delegation is for 17 Arthur Street. Yes.
Ring my doorbell and ask permission.
Good morning.
Hilda Shannon, and my wife and I bought the 17 Arthur Street property in October last year. And I feel like we're doing a bit of a catch-up here because we just moved to Ottawa 3 weeks ago, so we haven't had a chance to be involved in this process until now. So I guess this is a new request for either removal or a reassessment now that we've arrived here and we're getting familiar with our property. We're not convinced that our property meets the criteria of the design test, the building itself, or the way that it fits into the cultural heritage of our neighborhood. So I can speak to those points.
Well, perhaps we can save some time. This is a new objection.
Yeah.
I believe staff aren't aware of this, so you would be open to deferring this to allow time for reassessment.
Certainly, this is a new one that's come to our attention, and we'd look forward to some more time to have a close look.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, for staff, Councillor Brockington.
Just not to the delegate. When letters went out to all the homeowners and objections, or at least inquiries were made, did you automatically reassess?
Thank you for the question. When there was a specific request to reassess the property, yes, we reassessed it. But an objection for other reasons, if there was no specific request, we did not reassess the property.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, David Fleming is our next delegation, and after that, Luigia Bortorelli. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I am here representing Heritage Ottawa. I live in a house that is not included on the list. Heritage Ottawa applauds the city in taking this initiative. As Councillor Chiarelli pointed out, it's a requirement under the Ontario Heritage Act. And it's an important tool for identifying, assessing, and perhaps ultimately preserving our city's built heritage. The Heritage Reference List, which has been referred to prior to this by some speakers, was a very, not a good tool. It didn't have consistent criteria. It had evolved over 30 years, and even the addresses were sometimes wrong, which led to the demolition of some buildings which were of heritage significance. Now that we are looking at a set of criteria, there's obviously going to be problems. There's going to be people who say, it's too subjective, we don't meet the criteria. But, you know, we have to work through that, and I think that staff have done an excellent job in dealing with people who have challenged the inclusion on this list. I don't think, as Mr. Palawan said, that this is a tripwire for designation. Some more cynical than I might think maybe it should be, but it isn't. And we all know that that's not what's going to happen. It provides the city with a second look. It provides the city with doing a more in-depth research on 3,000 properties, potentially, that may be considered for designation. As Councillor McKenney pointed out, all 10 applications for demolition under this list have been approved. So there's no problem. As to whether it provides more or less protection, I have seen in the last 20 years properties that are protected under Parts 4 and 5 of the Orange Heritage Act demolished. So it doesn't guarantee the preservation of important examples of our heritage, and even designation as National Historic Sites of Canada, as we all know, doesn't prevent inappropriate developments or additions, and we'll be talking about that more probably on Thursday. So I think what we have to do is we have to give some time. You know, I can understand the owner's concerns. I'm not convinced that it puts any more of a burden on property owners than zoning does. People buy a property, it's zoned residential or it's zoned institutional. People want to demolish the structure that's already there. They want to build something new. You have to apply for a rezoning application. So in the same way, you would have to allow the city to have a second look at possible designation as a heritage building. And I think we now have, at last, the criteria. Maybe it does need to be fine-tuned, but we have at least something that will prevent things from inadvertently being demolished and losing examples of our built heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for David? Thanks very much. Our next delegation is Luigia Bertorelli. I understand her daughter Marissa will be speaking on her behalf this morning. And up next is R.J. Vey. And this is in regards to 71, 73, 75, and 77 Beechwood Avenue. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good afternoon, actually. We've just crossed the threshold.
Okay, so I'm Marissa Bertorelli, I'm her daughter-in-law, and I think I spoke with you yesterday. For the past 2 years, Louise has been really sick. That's why she's not here today, and she's been not really forthcoming in sharing all these letters. This is why it's kind of last minute contacting the office yesterday. So we went through it yesterday, so excuse me if it's a little blurred here because I had to do an Italian translation to English. So these are her words, and I'm just going to basically read the email that we came up with last night. I'm writing to you in regards to the proposal to add my properties to the City of Ottawa Heritage Register as non-designated listings. Although I am a supporter of heritage designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, I fail to comprehend why this property would be a candidate. I am asking for your consideration of not including it into the inventory, as I feel it does not contribute to any cultural or historical heritage value or of interest to anyone. I agree with her. Looking at the building, it's okay, but it's not, you know. Anyway, I operated a corner store in the neighborhood from 1969 to 1988. It used to be called Louise's Confectionery. Since my retirement, the building has undergone many changes. The frontal facade has undergone several changes, such as the conversion of a residential unit to a commercial unit. New commercial doors have been installed, wooden steps replaced by cement steps, and the one thing I remember the most, because I've been in this family for 33 years, they used to have beautiful Roman columns supporting, I guess, the balcony and also the front. Those are now gone, unfortunately, and they have been replaced by 4x4 posts. Some wooden windows have also been replaced by vinyl windows and other cosmetic alterations. In addition, being added to the registry is also a real possibility of constraint on future potential development prospects. The potential of the property being designated as a heritage property provides an uncertainty in her mind, and just, you know, that would be ingrained in any development proposals, as well as uncertainty of property values. Louisa goes on to say that I'm representing her. She's 85 with severe health issues at the moment and cannot be here today. So I have not had the opportunity to consult with a heritage planner or architect, nor have I seek legal advice. Notwithstanding, any property listed must be of interest according to the Heritage Inventory, Projects, Design Test, and Neighborhood Heritage Statement attribute. As a result, I strongly believe that the properties do not have such a cultural heritage value. I respectfully request that you please reassess and withdraw a recommendation to add the property to the inventory. I wish I had pictures of the property from back in the day. I'd have to go through all her files. As you know, an 85-year-old person just dumps everything, so it's hard to find it, but I remember it. It doesn't look like this at all.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Shirley has a question.
Yeah, just quickly, did she ask for a reassessment prior to this?
Yes, actually, I should have said that. She would like to have it reassessed, for sure.
Okay. So did she get a reassessment already?
No, because we called yesterday.
Yes.
So Louisa has gone through vertigo. She now has breast cancer. So
we will do that then.
Looking to staff for a recommendation on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I did speak with Lou J yesterday, and it was the first time we spoke about the property, so yeah, we're open to reassessing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. RJ Vey, or V, is next, 186 2nd Avenue, and then YC Lee Architect. Good morning. Is it RJ Vey or V? Okay, thank you. You have 5 minutes.
I came in here, I don't really have a presentation except for the fact that when we bought the property, I just was looking at the fact that, you know, the property is very close to the hospital where I work. And so, you know, I'm ignorant about the fact that, you know, this heritage designation, what am I looking at in terms of the designation? I'm all confused about architecture and such. So I don't know what the committee and or the staff has been looking at. The reason that I came to today is the fact that, you know, it impacts me in terms of my retirement. I'm in the cost of retirement, and so when I look at the assets, it does look like it affects the liquidity of the property. And so if there is going to be added costs in terms of having to repair the property, as the property is old, then first and foremost, I might be forced to sell the property, for one. And secondarily, if I can't sell the property because of the designation, is there a fund that the committee and or actually the staff is willing to actually add on to, so I can meet possibly the requirements of having to repair the property?
Do we have any, we'll ask that to staff, but I want to give a chance to any committee members if they have any questions first. Councillor Brockington.
Have you been here since 9:30, since when the committee started, or?
Yes.
Okay, we've been talking at length about what impacts, if any, would be on any homeowner or building owner if you
Yes,
added to
and
the
I was
list.
impressed actually by the gentleman who actually represented, with actually, he's a lawyer, so I didn't come in with all the facilities of being very involved in terms of, and yes, I did not hear that, you know, any one of them has actually asked the committee in terms of, yes, if actually your property is designated, and then you have to actually do some repairs because it is needed, that there is any fund that is provided, and or actually we can access as a property owner to actually meet the requirements of the committee.
So maybe we can get that question answered. I think it's a fair question, but as far as any type of internal or external repairs, minor or extensive, there are no restrictions on you if you're added to this list. Mr. Chair, to the question about whether any funds are available to staff.
Yeah, can staff answer about funds available?
Thank you, Chair. So there are grants available for repair, renovation, restoration for designated properties. It's a matching grant up to $10,000 for individual property owners. As a non-designated listing, which is what this property is, there's no funds available, but there's also no requirement to restore the property. There's no restrictions on repairs. There's no requirement for the owner to restore the building back to a certain condition.
I'm going to ask that before you leave, make sure you connect with staff, because I think it'd be very useful if you had the chance to sit down with them and they can answer any of the questions that you have. So before you leave today, make sure you share your contact info, and we'll make sure you have an opportunity to meet with the staff. Thank you very much for coming today. Our next delegation is Y.C. Lee, architect, regarding 330 Wilbrod. And following that is Judy McDonald. Good morning, Mr. Lee. I don't know if you remember me, Mr. Lee, but I rented my very first apartment from you in Centertown about 25 years ago, so nice to see you again.
Thank you, Your Honor. I come here not for 330 of Wilbrod.
Oh, okay. What's the address?
I just I did not want to speak.
Okay.
I don't want to say anything. I just congratulate and comment the City of Ottawa taking serious action for our young city for the future culture. Your heritage destination for the city culture, even we are very young city. I was in Quebec, 300 odd years old. They are not designated. We are young, like a baby. You may only permit me 5 minutes to speak. I just say congratulations on that respect. Second point, I also congratulate the heritage planner. The city engaged over 4 years, designate about 4,000 and limit down to 200. From that 200, I was sent about 22 younger buildings as have heritage culture interest. And those buildings, some they do recognize very good value. Heritage, my means, I do not know how to speak. Took me 7 years, I cannot pass my English. Heritage means old things. We learn old things. When I was a student on second year or first year, Betty Peldowski was my classmate. I ran out of class in 15 minutes. I finished my work. He was still doing drafting. I learned same thing he learned. Take me 5 years, I did not pass history of architecture. Doctor passed me 49 marks. Professor Donahue asked a question, architecture, does it need heritage? Does it need ornamentation? Or architecture space? Barry cannot answer that, neither do I. Heritage do means to help us to learn the past. I learned. Do means teach us culture. City is built by culture. Rooms that do not finish in one day. Egyptian pyramids take 1,000 years. I've been taking on and on continued education. China can build wood buildings 67 meters in height. Today I have certificate. Vancouver, we try to, on wood building, 18 story. Ontario now, we allow 6 story on wood building for that. We following up. Our building code allow that. Now, heritage, we do need good architecture on our young city, whether new or old. Doesn't mean whether new is take it down and rebuild it, or we keep it whether 100 years old. My building I bought in 67, that I choose to be a citizen in Ottawa. I came to Canada in 1955. I take it as my home. I obey the cities, all your good politicians, I don't say the bad ones, to do the good work and build our city and make it recognized. I might have 2 buildings and recognized. NAC is a building I have to finish and name it. I'm partner with ARCAP, Montreal. I want to open the office in Ottawa. Take us 2 months to 2 years did not decide to put an office in Ottawa.
30 seconds, Mr. Lee.
Sorry. I would encourage ourselves. I'm representing the church also on Chinatown. I'm not representing them. I would do the work for them at cost for that. I'm not representing my church to say that. I do want, give me 5 more seconds. I do want the city to keep the heritage group and continue not 4.5 years. Set a table, 7 criteria point. Heritage, the affecting. The function, if a good architecture. Engineer and architect have to build. City administration make the decision. We will try to follow. If we can't follow, we sit down and discuss it and compromise. I hear the objection from the lawyer. The best lawyer.
Mr. Lee, thank you very much for your presentation.
We should work with that. I hear the encouragement and we should encourage that.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want you to defer that decision, help the people who crying, the lady, that don't make my building heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. We need to move on to our next delegations. Next up, thank you, Mr. Lee. Next up, we have Judy McDonald, followed by Judy Faulkner. And Judy McDonald is speaking on 8 Hazel Road.
I'll try to keep to 5 minutes. Mr. Chair, committee, and staff, it's a hard act to follow, being 21 out of 24 too. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an architect, but I am asking for a reassessment. I know this is my last sort of kick at it, so I'm just hoping I can make sense of what's been assessed and ask you to take a look at it again. I brought, I know it's not standard, but I brought handouts if I could. Somebody could hand them out just, and this is, I brought some for staff too. So I've tried to be diligent with learning nomenclature, and I've actually consulted with some architects to try to see if I had a reasonable reason to even bring this up. So I'm just going to go through the assessment that was done. And there's sort of 3 criteria that I think I have a strong case for. And actually, the staff that I met said I had a strong case, and it was, objective, subjective, which way it could go. So I'd just like to review that with you and identify the feedback that I got and then the feedback I have again. So the three criteria that I'm trying to address and identify that it's not a strong case is the architectural style. So it was cited as being vernacular and Edwardian classism with the parge board and the two-story porch. So the original house was one story across, and it had a wide veranda. So the front view is actually 2 stories now, and it's not the original. The barge board has aluminum siding on it, so the 2 pieces that they've identified, they don't exist. They identified the veranda, and it has aluminum shutters and aluminum windows. So the facade's been adapted. So the staff feedback was that they agreed that the porch wasn't original and that the porch was an irreversible intervention. Like, this is the whole front of my house. And so I guess my response was that to be irreversible intervention means that I have to take down the whole front porch. If you can see the picture, it's a double-storied front porch, and that was their argument for it being architectural style. And I mean, it's ridiculous to think I have to change the whole 2 stories to make a thing. And the barge board is also has aluminum on it, so they're saying irreversible, that it is irreversible. I have to change the barge board. Like, that's not a fair assessment, I don't think. The degree of integrity. So the argument was that it has double hung windows at the front. So the double hung windows have been replaced by aluminum windows, and they're immovable. We have casement windows on the side, and again, these are not. It's not a vernacular architecture that was stated. The staff said that the double hung windows and the aluminum were, quote, generally sympathetic to the facade. So, I mean, they're aluminum windows, and they're casement windows. I've never heard aluminum encasement ever been referred to as sympathetic to, or culturally, a cultural heritage. And again, those are the 2 points that were brought up, was the windows. The last point was that the architectural integrity, under that, it just says addition to the rear, so there's no explanation on the 3rd point as to what I have. So if you look at the one shot there's actually been no side view of the house, and it's on the corner, so the addition takes up more than half the footprint of the house, and it's aluminum siding and with casement windows and so forth. So the feedback was that it's at the rear of the house, and it's 1.5 stories, and it's considerably hidden. I live on a corner, so the facade is not hidden. It's half the house. And again, it's aluminum siding and casement windows, and it wasn't there before. So I guess I'm asking, and as I understand it from speaking with architects and actually speaking with the staff, I've met Ashley and David, and they came on site on October 12th, and we had a discussion, and they actually said I had very strong points.
30 seconds.
Thanks. They had strong points, and they identified that it is subjective. I mean, you can make points on both sides, and so I was a little surprised that it wasn't removed, because they said they were going to consider removing it. And I would just, I guess I'm asking if you could, because it's been identified as having strong points, if I could talk to somebody about reassessing the points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from the committee? So, staff, you've been aware of this objection previously, and a reassessment has occurred. Yeah, speak briefly to some of the concerns that have been raised.
Yeah,
Yes, this was a property that was deferred from the Old Ottawa South, Old Ottawa East report in 2017. And since that time, as the speaker mentioned, David and Ashley from Heritage Services met with you and reviewed the property and came, from my understanding and from our notes from them, came to the same conclusion that it meets our criteria. Cass and I, when we took on the project, we also reviewed all of the deferrals from the 2017 reports, and Cass and I found that these properties did meet the criteria as well, and so our position on the property has not changed, and I haven't seen yet any additional details that hadn't been submitted previously, but please correct me if I'm wrong in that understanding.
We talked about the rebuttal that came up, and and I gave my rebuttal, and they agreed with my rebuttal. So there's been nothing brought to my attention. They had nothing more to add, and they agreed that it was a strong case. So there's been nothing new to say that these aren't strong points to me anyway. And we had a pretty frank discussion on site, and they had no. I've rebutted the rebuttal, and they had nothing to add, and they agreed that they were strong points. So I'm not sure what happened after that, because that's where I understood it was going.
So staff in this case, this is one that was deferred from a previous report. You've done a reassessment and came to the same conclusion in terms of the design and context of the building itself. So you're not recommending that this be deferred to another report at this time?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Judy Faulkner, and then Marek Jakubecki. Ms. Faulkner, is there a specific property that you're speaking on, or is it a general comment?
I'm making general comments, but I am intimately familiar with Lara Waite's situation, which I will make reference to. I've been a realtor for over 3 decades and the owner of a brokerage that specializes in the urban core. I'm very concerned about the 60-day delay, and I'm addressing this because I've heard it made light of this morning. From my vantage point, this is a serious negative in trying to sell a house. In current market conditions, most well-situated older homes with good lot sizes sell within days of going to the market. If we look at Lara Waite's experience with 93 Glebe Avenue, we'll learn something from that. Lara offers her home for sale, and it is disclosed that her home is on the list being considered for the Heritage Register. It is a legal requirement for realtors to seek and disclose information, and it was appropriate to disclose this fact, but it has had a negative impact on outcome for Lara. The response to 93 Glebe situation supports Mr. Polloman's claim that this puts a cloud on the property. Like most homeowners, Lara would like to generate the highest possible price, which may come from a person wishing to demolish her modest home or from a person wanting to build new. Her property enjoys a prime glebe location near Patterson Creek, and her zoning allows for more than one residential unit to be constructed. In this situation, offers are expected from a range of buyers to build new or to renovate. The price differential between those two groups of buyers could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That has a huge impact on a property owner. At this time, because Lara's property is just on the list to be considered for the registry, a buyer would need to submit a construction permit and receive a demolition permit prior to June 26th. This is not realistic. If Lara's property is added to the registry June 26th, the buyer and seller will be required to negotiate a sale conditional for 60 days for the city to determine whether the home can be demolished. How many buyers do you think will commit to a 60-day conditional period? In my opinion, not many. Leaving buyers and sellers in limbo like this is unacceptable. The parties to the agreement of a purchase and sale will not know for up to 60 days the development potential of the property. This can have a devastating effect on outcome, as has been Lara's experience. Requiring a conditional period does in fact affect the saleability of the property. To avoid a conditional period, owners should seek to remove their property from the registry at the earliest possible opportunity. Sellers need to know the development potential of their property before they enter into negotiations to sell.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moffat.
What's your opinion on heritage designated properties?
It clouds the property.
So you oppose heritage designated properties?
No comment.
Do you think the history of housing and architecture in the city of Ottawa matters?
No comment. I'm not here to answer those questions.
Why are you here? Just to advocate so that people can tear down houses?
I'm outlining actually a real-life situation, how what is happening today is affecting an owner.
For people to buy houses, to tear them down and build bigger houses, and that's your concern, is that that's going to affect your business?
I'm not here for any self-serving
My house has been for
purpose.
sale since December 28th. My house is on this list. I've had 50 showings. Not a single person has said they're not buying my house because it's on the Heritage Register. Not a single person.
Lyra's property is, as I mentioned, it's zoned for more than one unit, and it's in a prime residential location. She's described it's modest, it's in need of work.
And anyone can do work, but the only issue is that they can't tear it, they might not be able to tear it down unless they go through the process after. Now, you seem to be advocating for people to rush through the process to make sure that they can demolish the house before it gets added to this list. It's a little bit surprising.
Could you repeat that, please?
You're just going to say no comment, so don't worry.
No, but I object to the 60-day conditional period. If you want the property protected under the Heritage Act...
Heritage matters. Heritage matters.
Pardon me?
Heritage matters, and we can't possibly go and designate every single heritage property in the city. But what we can do is provide a little bit of reprieve. So in the case that a building is being proposed to be demolished, that we can at least look at it to say, should that be saved or should it be let go? Because in all the cases I've dealt with, every time someone's come and asked for a building to be demolished on the Heritage Register, it's been demolished. But it's given us a chance to say, should it be? And I think that matters.
If you look at the dynamics, though, of how properties are being sold...
That wasn't, I asked questions you said comment to, that wasn't a question, which means this isn't a debate.
Right. Thank you. I'll let you make a comment, and then if there's any other committee members, if you want to make a comment, go ahead.
The 60-day conditional period has a serious negative impact on property owners. If it can be avoided, it should. One way a homeowner can take control is by asking it to be deregistered immediately. The other solution would be for you to do your due diligence in advance and putting it directly on and covered under the Heritage Act.
Any other committee members with a question? Okay, thank you very much. Our next delegation is Marek Jakubecki, and then we have Christy Chules, and then S. Hum. Mr. Jakubecki, 730 Echo Drive. Is that correct?
Mr. Jakubecki asked me to speak for.
Okay.
He was operated a few days ago and is not feeling well.
Okay, well, have a seat. You're welcome to make a presentation.
It's regarding 730 Echo. My name is Louis Lomascolo. I'm a commercial real estate agent here in Ottawa with Coldwell Banker Sarazen.
Can you just move the microphone a bit closer?
Yeah. I've been a real estate agent for the last 34 years. And Mr. Jakubecki, after he received this letter notifying him of this registry, he's completely opposed to it for the simple reason that he feels that it violates his right as a landlord he takes the position that the city is dictating to him. And I also want to add that over the many years of experience that I have in this business and dealing with most of the major builders in the city, Claridge, Minto, and so on, this heritage thing, when a property is in the registry or is zoned heritage, builders run away from that. They just, it also brings down the value of a property. And that's his position.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenney has a question.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard from a few people today that the supposition that being on a registry or even designation brings down property value, but do you have absolute proof of that? Like, I just wonder if there's anything that you can show us.
Oh, Madam
I
Chair,
haven't seen any proof of that.
Madam Chair, like I said, I've been in this business 34 years, and I deal with personally on a weekly basis with people like Bill Mahatra and the major builders, Kuku, Gouchard from...
But can you show me any listings, any type of proof that having a home on a registry has had a negative impact on the value of the home?
Well,
on the registry?
Simply because people walk away. I mean, they walk away. They
so
don't want
your answer is no? You have no proof?
Well, I don't have any to show you right now, but I can.
Okay. If you could send it, I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? And staff, this is another property that you are aware of the concerns previously?
That's correct.
And it comes from a previous, deferred from a previous list, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It was deferred from the 2017 report.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Christy Chules, speaking on 686 Albert Street. I don't think she's here. All right, S. Hum at 395 2nd Avenue. Hi, Ms. Hum.
Good afternoon. I originally came here to lobby on the behalf of my family, and just listening to everyone, I thought, you know what, I think there's a bigger picture here. It seems to be, from what I just gathered, because I'm just new to all of this, a new process, a new initiative, and I'm wondering if there's the opportunity for the council and for the subcommittee to really look at the process undertaken. And I did put in a letter, so you'll see it, but I want to just read, because I only have 5 minutes, I hear, to read my last paragraph. And for me and for our family, true heritage is important. There's no question. However, heritage decisions cannot and should not be made in isolation of other realities. For our family, as with most others, home ownership is our most significant expense and asset. And I believe that you have a responsibility, not just to heritage, but to the overall owner's consequences and added hardship that your recommendations could place on individuals and families. Most of the houses to be listed in this registry do not have significant real heritage value. The property owners who pay all of the expenses must be allowed to choose whether their home is listed. And I really do believe that we need to look at the process. I understand, and I've heard in sitting back there and listening, that there's not even a requirement to inform us. Okay, that's part of the law. There's also, we have people who are learned and skilled and seasoned in the area to assess the properties. I also heard the word subjective. This is a major thing for most families. This is our biggest investment, and it is a deterrent when people hear it is heritage. And I think that it is within your power to, and councillors, when it goes on the 26th, to really look at the process and say, is this a good one? And even though you have the privilege, the right to not tell us, is that fundamentally right? So that's all I really have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Moffat has a question.
I know we talk a lot, you hear a lot about property values, concern about values. Are you familiar with St. Charles Church on Beechwood Avenue?
No.
So I've been on this committee since its inception in 2012, and we had an application to designate under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, so not register, but actual heritage designation of the church. And the owners of the church, they showed up and they were speaking against it. People from the church were against it because they felt it was going to hinder their ability to move forward with the church. In 2014, they sold the church to a developer for $4 million. And it is now subject to a development application that is going to improve the community and preserve the church. So this notion, and it speaks to Catherine McKinney's point earlier, that does anyone have proof that this hurts property value? There is no proof that it hurts property value. And in many cases, like with the St. Charles Church situation, that's actually a designated property that has gone up in value and is now being developed with the church being saved. An iconic church on Beechwood Avenue. And that's because it was designated under the Heritage Act by this committee. So people might not like the process because whenever we deal with heritage properties here, whenever we deal with designations, there's always the owner that comes and opposes it. But the opposition is almost always in self-interest and not for the greater good of the city or the greater good of heritage in general. The mandate of this committee is to protect heritage. Like that cannot be lost here.
Am I allowed to speak?
No. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. That concludes our delegations. So thank you to everyone from the public who did come out and speak. We have a motion prepared that lists a number of properties that have either come up previous to today's meeting or new properties identified through the delegations today that would be recommended to remove from the current list and then defer to the fall evaluation. Do we have the motion ready for Member Quinn to introduce? I guess well, why don't we introduce it with those ones on it, because Councillor Shirley asked for it, and then we can talk about where we go from there. So give us one moment here. We're just going to finalize the text of the motion. While we're doing that, I was going to make a closing comment, but I'll do it now while we're waiting. We've had a lot of delegations. There were 27 signed up, although a few weren't here. We had a lot of correspondence on this file. I want folks, especially the media, to not misconstrue this as, so many delegations that it being a negative process. We've had a lot of delegations because there are a lot of properties on this list. There's over 2,300 properties that we're proposing to add to the register, and 96% of those have either had no objection or have been supported by the property owners. We're looking at 4%, so just under 100 of these properties over 2 years. Some of them, as we've seen today, staff have done a reassess or recommending a reassessment. Others have been resolved. So we've had a lot of delegations, but I think the delegations is reflective simply of the sheer number of properties that are involved in this case. This is pretty unusual that we'd be doing such a large addition. And when we come to the fall, we're going to see a much smaller number of properties, and I would assume probably a very similar ratio in terms of opposition or support for the additions to the list. I hear the printer going, so it means we're almost ready. We'll get it. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion reads, be it resolved that in the report, be it resolved that the report be amended by deleting from document 1 the following properties, known as deferred properties: 351 Pleasant Park Road, 71, 73, 75, and 77 Beechwood Avenue, 4898 Limebank Road, 339 to 341 Gloucester Street, 130 Albert Street, 177 Pretoria Avenue, and 17 Arthur Street. Be it further resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee directs staff to consult with the owners of deferred properties, and that staff bring back in Q4 2019 to Built Heritage Subcommittee and Council a determination of whether the deferred properties should be added to the Heritage Register in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act.
Okay, thank you, Member Quinn. Any comments or questions on the motion from the committee? I would like to suggest that, as a friendly amendment, that we remove the 130 Albert and the 177 Pretoria, on the simple reason that the process we followed throughout this meeting was to only put properties on this deferral list if they have not been previously identified or assessed by staff, and if there was no, on both of these properties, there was no new information presented in terms of the design and context. And for that reason, I think they're out of place on this deferral list. Councillor Shirley?
No, I think it makes good sense to leave them on the list because the lawyer present made a number of legal arguments, that some of which don't appear to have been answered and still require some time. And they seem determined enough that if they get into the apparent randomness of this, that it could have implications for the whole thing. So I would just take them off, since they aren't really things that we would consider designating right now anyway. So take them off for now, and let's go through that process so we will have met his concern.
Are there any other comments from the committee? Councillor Brockington?
Generally speaking, thank you to staff for this lengthy review and the assessment that touched on many, many wards. I don't fault anyone for coming in today or for providing comments because, as one speaker pointed out, this is the largest asset that most of us own, and I think there's still a lot of misconception about what the implications are if your house is added to the registry. I think there's a lot of improvement, a lot more content that we can add to this brochure that gets included in the envelope that goes to people's homes, because I think there's a lot more detail that can help reassure people what being added to the registry means and what it doesn't mean. So I'd certainly work with staff on that after this. Mr. Polwin did make some arguments, but I think that he made some statements that murkied the waters as well. First, he said that this goes on your title, and only after we pursued it further, it was clarified this does not go on your title. He talked about your assessments being affected. Your assessments are not affected by this. And he said that being on the register is a springboard to designation. That's also not correct. That's not a true statement. This is the whole point of waiting up to 60 days for a demolition permit to be issued is, as Councillor McKenney said, or my words, it's an opportunity for a second sober thought, particularly for properties, I think, that haven't been on the register, or that have been on the registry for a while. It gives staff that opportunity to go back and say, is there value in reassessing this and bumping it up to designation? But as we've heard, all requests thus far for demolition have been approved. So while there may not be concrete evidence that this impacts a seller's ability to sell, it's out there. It is out there. The perception or misperception that this may handcuff a future owner's ability to even alter the property, even though that's not the case, is out there. And so I think the onus is on the city as it proceeds with other rounds to be even more clear as possible about what being added to the register means, so we can try and address some of those concerns. But even if there aren't serious ramifications about whether you can renovate your home or even sell your home, the fact that that might turn a prospective buyer away is a real impact. Because there are some people that just don't want to take on that risk. So we at least have to acknowledge that that exists out there. But I think, like I said, I think this brochure, Mr. Chair, needs to be expanded upon to provide folks who are proposed to be on the list to give them even more information as possible. There are a number of properties that are identified that are in River Ward. I certainly have spoken to a few property owners who have been identified and provided them some information and even some contacts with city, but have not heard in any great detail from those who are opposed. It was more questions, again, about what does this mean exactly? Am I limited to making any changes to my building, to my home? There are a number of institutions identified, churches and a school as well, but certainly not to the same volume as some other wards. So I just wanted to address that. I do think that there's value in staff coming back into my ward in particular. There's a recommendation that identifies some other neighborhoods, including the oldest part of Carlington, which has a significant number of veterans' homes. I'm pleased that this is going to be future consideration, a future neighborhood, and maybe there'll be a number of properties identified at that time. But, you know, that is a part of Ottawa's history that has to be recognized and identified for its heritage and cultural value. And I appreciate that that will be a future review. So at this time, Mr. Chair, I will be supporting the motion. I'm kind of along the lines of you with those two properties, 130 Albert, 177 Pretoria. I do not think they should be deferred at this time, so I'm formally going to move an amendment that those two properties be struck from this deferred list.
Well, let's first. If Councillor Shirelli is adamant that they should be considered, you could introduce that as a separate motion. So why don't, on the amendment that Councillor Brockington has suggested, which is striking the Albert Street and the Pretoria Avenue address, is that carried? Carried. So can we vote on this first motion then? Okay, I'll let you speak on it.
Yeah, I think, first of all, the sensitivity of those two properties is not that significant. The significance of moving ahead without exempting them is very significant to us because this whole thing can end up in court and impugn the process so far and look to the conscious decision that was made not to do scoring and stuff like that. And we can avoid all that simply by severing two properties from it. They've made those arguments, and you can move ahead with your process. And otherwise, you don't know what's going to happen. They seem determined enough that they will pursue it further. I can't actually believe the amount they've spent on it so far. So they seem willing to do it further. I don't know if it's worth it to you to spend that money to maintain what's really a theoretical issue because those properties aren't likely to ever be designated anyway, then go ahead. But I think just for the maintaining the purpose and allowing everything to move forward unobstructed, I think it's the best move. And he has raised murky the issue, but he's a lawyer, so that's going to be part of his job. But he's also raised some significant issues that could end up in another forum being evaluated. So I'd like to keep it here and just move forward from here.
Well, I am going to recommend then that as I think there's a will of the committee here to treat Albert and Pretoria addresses separately. So I think the amendment that Councillor Brockington introduced was carried by this committee. And if you'd like to introduce a separate motion, we can look at that for those two particular addresses. But is member to defer? Yeah. Is member Quinn's motion carried as amended? Carried. Okay. Thank you. And
defer those two.
Say it again.
So I'll move a motion to defer those properties.
130 Albert Street and 177 Pretoria Avenue. The motion from Councillor Shirley. Any comments or discussion?
I would just comment that we've been in this committee room before, different committees where lawyers come in and threaten the committee with, we'll take you to court. I don't really see how governing a city based on the threat from lawyers is a really proper way to go. The reality is that those 3 properties had a lawyer here today. The 2,300 houses on here did not have a lawyer here today.
Right.
So is the message we're sending, bring a lawyer and you're good? Because I don't think that's what it should be, because none of the other residents had lawyers here. But because one did, then we're going to go and look at that one further because we're afraid of what?
Nobody has to.
Either you stand behind what you're doing or you don't. And I don't see the need to treat properties differently just because of their representation before committee.
Okay, well, I didn't say it's because they had a lawyer. It's because they had a lawyer who made significant arguments, okay, that others did not make about their properties. So it's the fact they were able to make the arguments, whether he had a lawyer or an artist, it doesn't matter. He made those arguments. And those arguments are the only thing that can impugn the process, particularly on scoring. You know, what if he asks in a court to produce the scoring? I doubt we can. So there was a time when we could, but that time is not now.
Okay, so on Councillor Shirley's motion, which would be essentially to defer 130 Albert and 177 Pretoria, should we do yeas and nays? Yeas and nays.
Member Hulsell, Member Podolsky, Councillor Shirelli.
Yes.
Councillor McKenney,
No.
Member Conforti,
Nay.
Councillor Brockington,
No.
Councillor Moffat,
No.
Vice Chair Quinn,
No.
Chair Gower.
No.
1 yay, 6 nays.
And the motion is defeated. All right. Are the report recommendations carried as amended? This is the original report. Carried? Carried. Thank you. So this item will rise to full council on June 26th. We have no in-camera items today. Are there any notices of motion for a future meeting? Any inquiries? Any other business? And on adjournment, is the motion carried? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your patience with the microphones today. Our next Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting is July 9th.